These videos require an extensive amount of time to create, so if you find them enjoyable and plan to drift off to sleep while watching, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing if you haven't already. It really makes a difference. Additionally, feel free to introduce yourself or simply say hello in the comments. I sincerely hope you find enjoyment in the stories, and that this video aids you in falling asleep. About a year ago, I set off on an extended road trip to New Mexico with a friend from White Rocks Campground. We predominantly camped along the way, with our initial night spent at a campsite within Jefferson National Forest in West Virginia. We stumbled upon some pamphlets for campsites at a gas station and decided to make our way to a place known as White Rocks Campground. The journey was quite an adventure, involving a more than 25-mile drive on a dirt road winding into the mountains. We truly found ourselves in the heart of nowhere. As we ventured in, we didn't encounter any other vehicles, with the exception of a truck that trailed us for around 15 minutes before taking a different route. Along the way, we passed by an enormous coal factory with a sign that stated it had been 62 days since the last on-site incident. The only people we saw during our drive were a group gathered by the side of the dirt road, clustered around a plastic bin that was ablaze. The entire situation was rather peculiar. Yet our enthusiasm for camping and our road trip had us chuckling at the oddity instead of feeling concerned, despite the lack of cell phone service and being deep in the mountains. Upon reaching the campground, we discovered it to be utterly deserted, with not a single car or person in sight. In this campground, we drove around, exploring the 30 or so sites, hoping to encounter someone along the way. However, when it became evident that we were completely alone, we chose a spot at random and decided to settle there. Exiting the car, we stood still, absorbing the unnerving silence that enveloped us. Although I've always cherished being in the woods without ever feeling threatened or intimidated, this time felt different. The usual bird calls were absent, replaced by an oppressive and eerie hush, reminiscent of a scene from a Blair Witch movie. As daylight slipped away rapidly, we concluded it was time to start a fire and pitch our tent to make ourselves comfortable. My friend took charge of setting up the tent while I focused on kindling the fire. As we busied ourselves with our respective tasks, we occasionally paused to listen intently. My friend remarked that if anyone were to approach us, the ubiquitous crunchy leaves would at least alert us to their presence. You can probably guess where this is heading. I initially thought we were simply scaring ourselves with our wild imaginations. Yet, it genuinely felt as if someone was observing us. It was the first time in my life that I'd experienced such a sensation, and it sent shivers down my spine. I had the urge to leave, but I maintained my composure for my friend Sake, who, as it turned out, was also internally panicking while trying to act calm. Once we successfully got the fire going and the tent and sleeping bags were ready, the sun had fully set. Sitting together around the fire, the encroaching darkness seemed to press in on us, creating a suffocating atmosphere. To ease the tension, my friend pulled out a book, intending to read aloud and help us relax. While reading, I occasionally used my headlamp to scan the area around us. Ever since we arrived at the campsite, I couldn't shake the persistent feeling that someone might be lurking in the woods. It was pitch black, and our fire served as a glaring beacon. My friend and I decided to dismiss our unease, thinking, to heck with it, let's just go to bed. We believed we would fall asleep quickly and then pack up in the morning to get out of there as soon as possible. After extinguishing the fire, I retrieved the single knife we had, which was still in the car, and kept it next to me inside the tent. Once we settled into our sleeping bags, my friend took out her cell phone to check for a signal, but as we anticipated, there was none. She attempted to call her boyfriend just in case, and I distinctly remember saying aloud, "We have no reception out here, it won't work." We lay there in silence, watching her phone as it tried to connect, only to eventually disconnect. Just when we thought the situation couldn't get any worse, we suddenly heard footsteps about 20 feet to the left of our tent. These were soft, deliberate steps, as if someone had been standing behind a tree near our tent and began walking toward us. The crunching leaves did their job well, amplifying our fear. We froze, staring at each other with wide eyes as the footsteps drew closer to the tent, then veered behind it for a few yards before coming to a stop. The silence that followed was bone-chilling. These were heavy, booted footsteps with the unmistakable cadence of a person walking, not an animal. My friend grabbed the knife that was next to my bag, and with her headlamp illuminating the darkness, She unzipped the tent and stepped outside, standing resolute in front of the tent with her knife at the ready, her light searching the area like a vigilant warrior. We both strained to hear any further footsteps or voices during what felt like an endless stretch of silence. I watched the beam from my friend's headlamp flicker among the trees, but it revealed nothing. She leaned back into the tent and whispered urgently, "We're getting the hell out of here." We hurriedly packed everything within roughly 10 minutes, moving swiftly, and then we fled the campsite. Reflecting on it, it's astonishing how we managed to keep our composure. We remained calm as we packed, despite being internally paralyzed with fear. We only had our headlamps to guide us, and the entire time we were packing, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the hill people were observing us, ready to seize us and drag us into the shadows. We felt utterly powerless, yet it seemed unreal, as if we were just scaring ourselves. Still, that unsettling sensation of being watched lingered as we sped away. Then came the chilling confirmation that someone or something had indeed been tracking us. As we drove away from the campsite, we spotted two grimy black trucks parked discreetly off the side of the road, hidden among the trees but still noticeable. They certainly hadn't been there when we arrived earlier, and the nearest residential homes were approximately 15 miles away. We didn't see anyone near the trucks, nor did we stop to investigate. We reached a motel and stayed there for the night, sharing our story with the others. The motel proprietor was incredibly kind and reassuring, even offering us some money for another motel if we found it necessary. I vowed to that man that I would write him a stellar review. I will remember every detail of that night for the remainder of my life. The unsettling sensation of being observed, the sudden footsteps so near our tent, and the ominous black trucks by the roadside. If you're enjoying the video, please leave a like. In the 90s, before the era of ubiquitous cell phones, my Girl Scout troop found ourselves camping in a state park when a severe storm swept through, accompanied by major flood warnings. The park rangers hurriedly went from campsite to campsite, evacuating everyone to higher ground. Everyone, that is, except our group and the Boy Scouts at the site adjacent to ours. We went to sleep under a light drizzle, only to awaken in the middle of the night to find our tents collapsing as the water rapidly rose. The Boy Scouts, aged 12 to 16, and we, aged between 7 and 9, quickly helped each other pack up our site and load our cars. Unfortunately, the roads were perilous to drive on because we couldn't gauge the water's depth. Nor did we know if any part of the road had been washed away. We left all the vehicles behind and used the map provided by the scout leaders to locate a place that wouldn't be submerged. A few miles away, there were treehouse cabins built around trees, elevated 15 feet in the air. It was determined that moving quickly was essential, and this was our best option. The older boys and the adults carried the youngest with urgency. As the harsh wind made it impossible for the girls to remain standing, the relentless gusts and downpour drenched everyone to the bone. We managed to reach the cabins, where the adults forced their way in and retrieved the emergency supplies, including space blankets. There was no option to start a fire since there was no firewood available. The year had been particularly dry, and campfires were prohibited due to the high risk of igniting a forest fire. I vividly recall shivering for hours, huddled with the other scouts on the floor, the boys forming a circle around us, doing their utmost to keep us warm. One of the boys inquired if we knew any Girl Scout songs. We sang every tune we could remember, and the leaders taught us some new ones they had picked up over time. Eventually, we persuaded the boys to join us in singing rounds. The storm raged on through the night, causing some girls to cry, and I recall one of them having a panic attack. The sound of the storm relentlessly pounding against the cabin sent creaks echoing throughout the structure. Being essentially in a treehouse amplified the fear, as I was convinced we might be blown over, either to fly away or to be crushed upon hitting the ground. It was impossible to see what was happening outside. We could only hear the water, the rustling of the trees, and the creaking of the cabin. Despite the cold, we feared more that we might perish in the rushing water. The storm continued its assault on the cabin well into the night. Eventually, once we were somewhat drier, a group of us managed to drift into sleep. I had been lying there for what seemed like an eternity, struggling to fall asleep due to the incessant pounding noises. I kept jerking awake, caught in a half-asleep state, unable to fully succumb to slumber. In the early hours of the morning, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, as I finally began to feel my eyelids grow heavy. I closed them and sensed myself gradually drifting away. Suddenly, a branch crashed through one of the windows in the cabin, sending shards of glass scattering everywhere and startling everyone awake. The room filled with screams as the camp leaders frantically attempted to calm us down while trying to figure out what had occurred. The place was still enveloped in darkness, and a few of the children had been cut by the glass. The older boys and camp leaders banded together to tend to everyone's injuries and address the shattered glass situation. If there was ever a night to earn some accolades, it was undoubtedly this one. We all really came together, and I felt secure with those around me despite the perilous circumstances. As morning arrived, the rain subsided to a gentle drizzle, and a ranger appeared to assess the park's damage. He discovered us and promptly left to get assistance. They returned with an array of trucks and all-terrain vehicles, swiftly transporting us to a location where doctors were on hand to evaluate our condition. It was pure luck that none of us suffered anything more severe than chills and a few cuts from the glass. The situation could have been far worse, and we were incredibly fortunate to have survived at all. It was a situation where we could have easily perished. Had the flood surged all at once instead of rising gradually, we might have perished in our sleep. Without the Boy Scouts' intervention, as young girls, we wouldn't have managed the trek to safety. Attempting to drive would have resulted in us being swept away. My wife, our dog, and I were on the second day of an 80 km hike through northern Ontario, heading toward Elney Provincial Park. We established our camp on a peninsula that extended about 750 meters into a lake, with only one path leading onto it and one way off. Since around 9 p.m., we had been hearing howls, growing progressively louder as the night wore on. By around 10 p.m., we went to bed, the howls drawing ever nearer. Suddenly, one emanated from directly behind us, along the trail leading down to the point. I emerged from the tent and began making a commotion to scare it away. This technique typically deters bears, with whom we've had numerous encounters. Yet, I neither saw nor heard anything in response. Returning to bed, I feigned confidence to avoid alarming my wife. Then, we both detected a presence outside the tent. Our dog, unusually silent, trembled with fear. I unzipped the tent to find a wolf staring at me from roughly 15 feet away. Grabbing the bear spray, I took aim but refrained from using it. Instead, I resumed yelling at the wolf and charged at it a few times. This approach is usually effective against black bears when there's no escape. However, the wolf seemed indifferent to my presence and merely lingered for a few moments before nonchalantly sauntering into the trees, just beyond my line of sight. I then constructed a fire between the tents. Through the long, sleepless night, I sat up in the tent, my headlamp casting a steady glow amidst the shadows of the bush. The haunting calls of 3 or 4 wolves echoed through the darkness, their howls to each other breaking the stillness every 20 minutes or so. They were alarmingly close. I estimated one to be within 50 yards. Anxiety gripped me as I feared they might snatch my dog. As dawn approached, around 6 a.m., a chorus of howls erupted, far louder and more numerous than before, as if 8 to 10 wolves were calling out in unison. We waited anxiously until 8 a.m., then hurriedly packed our things and got out of there as fast as we could. The journey had been arduous, 36 kilometers of steep terrain, taking us 2 days to trek in. But we managed to hike out in just 6.5 hours. About an hour and a half into our retreat, the wolves started howling behind us once more, seemingly trailing us. On the way back, we encountered a bear with 2 cubs. Ordinarily, this would have been cause for concern, but our only thought was to get out of their path. The hike took a toll on us. My wife lost all her toenails, and my poor dog developed severe anxiety about being in the tent. I'm Danny, and I was 19 when this unsettling experience unfolded. At the time, I lived with my parents but was eager to gain independence. I used my savings to purchase a car, thinking it would help me move out. Eventually, I landed a job delivering for Uber Eats. Their ads were everywhere, promising easy money with flexible hours, as long as you covered the fuel costs. Encouraged by friends who spoke highly of it, I decided to go through the sign-up process and give it a try. However, the reality turned out to be quite different. The job was stressful, with tight schedules to keep and payouts often amounted to just a few bucks if you didn't claim the bonuses. Delivery orders with generous tips or high payouts were rare, and I often struggled to earn enough to cover my fuel expenses. As a teenager, my financial responsibilities were limited to my car payments and insurance, so I didn't need to earn a fortune. However, the effort and time required made me feel somewhat shortchanged. Despite considering the idea of looking for another job, I pushed it aside due to a bit of laziness. Everything shifted after a particular incident. I accepted an order from KFC and set out to deliver it to the customer. It was a substantial order, sufficient for 4 or 5 people, but what caught my attention was the unusually high payout and a $20 tip, which was exceptional. The app informed me of the payment details when I accepted the order. While en route to the destination, I received a text via the Breaths app. The customer inquired about my whereabouts, despite the app indicating a 30-minute delivery time and me being on track to arrive in about 15 minutes. They could clearly see my real-time location, so I was puzzled by their inquiry. I didn't see any reason to stop and respond since I'd be there in about 5 minutes. Within seconds, they sent another impatient message, questioning the delay. I had only picked up the order a few minutes earlier, and this was visible on the app, so I wasn't behind schedule. I dismissed the strange messages, assuming it was a mistake on their part, or perhaps they were intoxicated or simply a typical Karen. I was somewhat familiar with the area, though I had seldom ventured into this particular part of town. It was situated in what one might refer to as the Hood, a notoriously tough neighborhood plagued by gang violence and a heavy police presence. Most people knew better than to come here, but I had driven through a few times and was aware that it wasn't excessively perilous. The address led me to an apartment complex, and as I neared the location, I noticed numerous people staring at me. After parking my car, I checked my phone and found another message had arrived, laced with harsh language, urging me to hurry. Typically, I leave my phone on the dashboard within sight to follow delivery instructions, but I realized it was unwise to leave it exposed in this area, so I decided to take it with me. The instructions directed me to go inside and deliver the package to the customer's apartment, which was somewhat unusual, but I assumed they simply didn't want to come downstairs. I pressed the button for the apartment number and was buzzed in. As I ascended the stairwell, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. People were scattered throughout the building, and I had to step over an unconscious woman on the stairs, feeling an intense urge to drop the bag and flee. I reached the apartment door, and a voice from inside instructed me to enter. I hesitated momentarily, puzzled as to why they couldn't just come to the door, but I was working against the clock and eager to complete the delivery. As I stepped into the apartment and the door closed behind me, I realized I had made a grave error. All the lights were off, and the only source of illumination in the room was the enormous television mounted on the wall. I glanced around and noticed a few unsavory-looking individuals. Offering them the bag, I was met with expressions of disdain. The man who appeared to be the leader gestured for someone else to take it from me. He began circling me as I stood there, completely paralyzed with fear. I had no clue what I was doing or how I had found myself in such a perilous predicament. Without hesitation, he started prodding me, asking what I had brought. I explained that I only had the food and needed to leave. He chuckled and instructed me to sit down. At that moment, I felt utterly lost. He began interrogating me about why it took so long and what I could do to make amends. I suggested refunding the tip, which caused him to explode with anger. "Tip? What tip? I didn't give you any tip," he retorted. Foolishly, I pulled out my phone to show him the $20 tip he had left. He snatched the phone from my hand and announced that he would be taking the refund. Everyone else burst into laughter, and I was being completely humiliated in front of them, utterly powerless. I timidly requested my phone back, but given that I wasn't the most imposing figure, I was trying hard not to provoke him further. When he refused, I resigned myself to my fate. He settled into a chair and started rummaging through the bag, selecting the food he wanted. Glancing back at me, he demanded to know why I was still there, suddenly jumping up and brandishing a knife as he spoke. I quickly apologized and hurried toward the door, rushing down the stairs. I nearly stumbled in my haste. As I stepped over the unconscious woman on my way out, I jumped into the car and drove faster than I ever had before. I headed to a safe place and immediately broke down, tears streaming down my face. My entire body trembled, and I was hyperventilating. I was a complete wreck. What on earth was I thinking, walking up to and entering someone else's apartment, especially a place like that? I had literally been warned never to go inside anywhere unfamiliar, but all I could focus on was the promise of that big tip. When I finally got home, I recounted the whole ordeal to my parents. They were incredibly supportive and relieved that I was safe, but they were also furious that I had ignored their advice about staying away from dangerous places. We managed to lock the phone remotely, so it was likely useless to anyone else, but I knew I would never see it again. Weeks later, when I acquired a new phone, I discovered that Uber had suspended my account. From their perspective, it looked like I had vanished with the delivery and never returned, so the customer received a full refund and free food. Losing both my phone and my job was a tough blow, but I was grateful to have escaped unharmed. I lost all interest in working as a delivery driver after that incident and secured a job at a restaurant instead. Earlier this year, I borrowed my dad's Tesla to visit my aunt, who resided in the countryside. As a 24-year-old guy who loves driving, especially my dad's car, I was thrilled he allowed me to take it. The road trip led me through some fairly isolated areas, but the journey was smooth overall. While driving, I navigated through a quaint town that boasted a charging station for my vehicle. As I paused there to recharge the Tesla, I attracted quite a bit of attention. Evidently, not many electric cars ventured through the area. The locals were brimming with curiosity and had numerous questions for me. I continued my journey without any complications and spent a few days with my aunt. Eventually, I opted to return home on a sunny afternoon, setting off around 3 o'clock. The first segment of the drive led me through a bustling town, followed by some tranquil suburban neighborhoods. Retracing my steps, I soon found myself back on the lengthy, narrow highway that seemed to twist and extend endlessly. It was serene, yet as the hours passed, fatigue began to set in. To stave off drowsiness, I turned up the radio, hoping the blaring music would help keep me alert. I squinted at the road, striving to concentrate, when I noticed a faint glimmer in the distance. It was the reflection of my car's headlights on another vehicle parked by the roadside. As I drew nearer, it became clear that the car was deserted. The area was secluded, with tinted windows obscuring the view inside, evoking an unnerving feeling of isolation. The nearest town was an hour's drive back. I pressed on but remained vigilant in case someone was nearby. Shortly thereafter, a piercingly bright light caught my attention in the rearview mirror. The intense illumination made it impossible to discern the vehicle behind me, only the blinding glare. The lights seemed to be drawing nearer, so I reduced my speed, expecting them to soon overtake me. However, as I progressed along the road, I noticed something disconcerting up ahead. Another car was stationed right in the middle of the road, completely obstructing my path. Its lights were off, and I didn't notice it until I was almost upon it. I slammed on the brakes as soon as I grasped the situation. Meanwhile, the lights in my rearview mirror grew increasingly brighter, accompanied by the sound of an approaching vehicle behind me. I resolved to turn my car around to extricate myself from the predicament, but when I glanced back, I saw yet another car parked diagonally behind me, effectively blocking any chance of retreat. Suddenly, everything became clear in my mind. I heard the doors of the surrounding cars opening and closing, and panic surged through my veins. Without a second thought, I veered off the road, crashing into the trees in an attempt to bypass the barriers and reach the other side of the road past the parked cars. I was so focused on dodging trees and preventing my car from getting stuck that I didn't even check to see if anyone was pursuing me. About 10 seconds after leaving the road, a gunshot echoed. I glanced back and saw they were indeed chasing me. The bullet struck somewhere in front of my car. Fear and adrenaline coursed through me as I continued to navigate the twisted dirt road. Another shot sounded, hitting the back of my car. I drove like a madman, speeding through the dense trees, desperately trying to lose them. My Tesla was skillfully maneuvering the rugged terrain with the adventure. I managed to eventually lose them, though I didn't ease up until I reached the highway once more. It took roughly 10 minutes of driving before my cell phone regained enough reception to contact the authorities. Fortunately, the assailants never caught up with me, and as far as I'm aware, they were never apprehended. To this day, I can't shake the curiosity about their intricate setup. Had they seen me arriving in a high-end vehicle and quickly concocted a plan? Could it have been the individuals I conversed with while charging my car? I had mentioned to them that I planned to pass through the area again in a few days. Not knowing the truth still unnerves me, but as you might imagine, my father has forbidden me from driving his Tesla on New Year's Eve ever again. Creating these videos demands a significant amount of time and energy, so your support is greatly valued. My name is Christine, and I was 23 when this unforgettable New Year's Eve unfolded. I was out with my cherished dog, Max, a few hours before the clock struck midnight. Wanting to take him for a brief walk before getting ready for the celebration, I let Max off his leash for just a moment, trusting his usual good behavior to enjoy the brisk air as we wandered through our neighborhood. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Townspeople were gearing up for the forthcoming New Year's festivities. Streets were adorned with vibrant decorations, and the air was buzzing with excitement. As Max and I strolled along the sidewalk, he joyfully trotted beside me, eagerly exploring the sights and sounds around us. The night was alive with a gentle breeze, and I was soaking in the ambience, unaware of the impending chaos. The evening was just beginning, and tranquility reigned. However, unbeknownst to me, everything was about to change in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, a firework erupted in the sky, illuminating the darkness with vibrant hues and a thunderous boom. Instinctively, I reached for Max, pulling him close, but my reaction came too late. The abrupt noise startled him, and in a heartbeat, he slipped from my grasp and dashed down the street. I called out his name frantically, but the cacophony of fireworks drowned out my pleas. Helpless, I watched in distress as he vanished into the night. My heart pounded with urgency as I realized I needed to find him amidst the chaos of the festivities. I spent countless hours driving around the neighborhood, searching for my beloved dog. The fireworks continued to paint the sky with dazzling colors, and the noise was overwhelming. It was challenging to concentrate with all the brilliance and explosions, but I had to locate him. If the fireworks were disorienting for me, they must have been terrifying for him. As I navigated through each corner and street, I called out his name with desperation. My only desire was to bring him back home and shield him from the overwhelming spectacle. The celebration enveloped me, yet all I could think about was finding my furry companion. I informed my friends and family that I wouldn't be joining them, as my sole focus was on searching for Max. A few of them offered to help in the search, but I was doubtful whether he would trust anyone but me. Finally, as I turned onto a dimly lit street, I noticed a throng of people gathered around a public bus, as if some kind of commotion was unfolding. My heart surged with anticipation. I parked the car hastily and hurried toward the cluster. From their chatter and body language, it was evident they were responding to an unusual animal presence on the bus. I navigated my way to the door and climbed aboard. There he was, cowering in the corner, barking urgently at every firework that pierced the night sky. I spoke to him softly, and he recognized my voice immediately. The fireworks continued to explode, but my focus remained solely on him. I reached down, scooping him up and cradling him in my arms. He nestled against my chest, seeking solace from the terrifying night. I expressed my gratitude to everyone who had attempted to assist and swiftly carried him back to my vehicle. Settling into the car with Max held securely, the drive home was significantly quieter, with the fireworks sounds gradually diminishing. Max was now found, and the new year could finally commence with both of us safe and sound. I sat in the car with Max, watching the fireworks through the window. The dazzling lights that had once frightened him now seemed to sparkle in celebration of our reunion. It was a New Year's Eve we would never forget, one that propelled me into a frantic late-night search for my best friend. The adventure began on a bright day during my college years. I had just wrapped up my final class and was eager to return to my dormitory. Upon arrival, I quickly booted up my computer, eager to explore the latest websites. Some time ago, my brother had signed me up for a Darkwood mailing list. In the past, people often sent me fascinating websites they stumbled upon. He was an absolute genius when it came to computers. Whether it was software development, coding, graphic design, or video production, he excelled in all of it. One day, I received a message from an unidentified user that read, "Chat with real people from the internet mail past." Intrigued by the possibility of something amusing, I clicked on it. The webpage loaded, revealing nothing but a chat box and a button to search for someone new to converse with. I clicked the button, and after a moment, I finally connected with someone. Initially, there was no text or anything, but suddenly, a message appeared. It read, "Dear friend, I am writing this internet mail to anyone who cares to read it." I am soon to become a father to twins. I hope this mail finds you well. We're heading out to see the new Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, at the theater to celebrate. That film was over 30 years old by then, so I thought this must be some kind of silly prank. There was no way someone from the 1980s was communicating with me. Deciding to indulge in the fun, I responded, yeah, I wouldn't exactly call that movie new. I watched it when I was a child. The reply came quickly. What are you talking about? The opening night is tonight. You must be confusing it with a different movie unless you live somewhere else where it premiered earlier. No, I'm a college student here in America, I answered. I then proceeded to list every Star Wars movie and TV show that existed. Since then, I've thought you possess an exceptionally vivid imagination, the guy remarked. He penned a lengthy message explaining that they only had plans for a limited number of films, and it was evident he was knowledgeable about the subject. He reminded me of my father, who was an avid Star Wars enthusiast. I was fully immersed in the time travel roleplay and mentioned to him that I was privy to a significant spoiler for The Empire Strikes Back. I respectfully inquired if he wished to hear it, and he confidently invited me to spoil it for him. If you've seen the movie, you know precisely which revelation I'm referring to. He chuckled and insisted that it was impossible, mentioning he was on his way to the theater. When he stopped responding, I assumed our entertaining little roleplay had concluded. It was quite heartwarming, and he truly embraced the character, speaking as if he'd only just discovered what a meme was, maintaining a courteous tone throughout. I continued with my day, likely studied less than I should have, and had a brief chat with my brother. I recounted the story of the guy from the 80s, and my brother laughed, saying he'd have to check out that website. Being considerably more of a nerd, he was deeply engrossed in all that stuff. He was somewhat antisocial, so the dark web was his haven. Hours later, I heard a notification sound. I had inadvertently left the website open, and the 80s guy had indeed replied. He was in a frenzy, questioning how I could possibly know about the major spoiler, speculating that I must have had early access or worked on the film. We continued our exchange, delving further into the mystery. I shared a story about how I lived in 2023, fully embracing the concept of being from the future and playfully teasing him about the advanced technology we have here. Part of me relished the role-playing experience, even though it wasn't typically my style. When he asked for my name, I was wise enough not to divulge any personal details to a stranger on the dark web. Instead, I inquired about his identity, and my stomach knotted when he introduced himself as Alfie Rogers. Suddenly, this conversation wasn't entertaining anymore. That was my father's name. This individual clearly had gathered information about me, likely tracking my IP address, uncovering my name, and conducting some basic genealogical research on sites like Ancestry.com and others that are readily available today. I challenged him, saying, "All right, you know my dad's name. This isn't amusing. What do you want?" I was well aware that such situations often devolve into blackmail attempts or twisted games. "What do you mean?" he responded, still deeply immersed in the role-playing. I couldn't believe he had just randomly selected a name that coincidentally matched my father's. He had to know who I was. "What do you want?" I demanded again. Even as I confronted him, he remained steadfast, confidently insisting that his name was Alfie Rogers and that he was living in the 1980s. He began listing a multitude of personal details to substantiate his claim of being a real person. He knew where my father was born, the origins of his parents, my mother's name, her parents, and even the car he owned. The entire situation was deeply unsettling. I'm quite proficient with computers, so I understand how much information one can extract from historical online records. The situation was undeniably unsettling. Whoever this individual was, they were exceptionally skilled at creating this eerie atmosphere, and it was evident they had meticulously planned it for quite some time. I pondered over a question that would unequivocally confirm his identity, something only my father would genuinely know. I eventually hit upon the ideal query. We had an old dog during my childhood, and regrettably, there were no photographs of her. No one else would have any knowledge of this dog, and there was absolutely no possibility of her name being in any database. So, I asked him, "Who is Poppy?" Poppy, that's my dog." "How did you know my dog's name?" She's a border collie, and she's sitting with me right now," he replied, clearly astonished. The sheer eeriness of the situation hit me. How is this possible? I began to panic internally, as I didn't subscribe to beliefs in phenomena like time travel or conversing with the past. Yet, this man possessed an uncanny amount of information about my family history. It simply defied logic. He answered every question I posed with remarkable accuracy. I believe I spent hours interrogating him about his entire life, and eventually, I found myself accepting whoever or whatever this individual was. It felt like I was conversing with my father when he was my age. I gradually moved beyond the initial unease. "Dad," I said, savoring every moment of this peculiar conversation. However, I did make one request of him. If he truly existed in the past and was indeed my father, I wanted him to take some photographs of Poppy. He chuckled and assured me he would get right on it. He mentioned that he needed to leave soon and expressed his fascination with how clever computers are. I don't think he fully comprehended the situation, but he participated enthusiastically, as though he were chatting with his actual son. Before he left, I asked him to tell Poppy that I missed her. Father holding me up high, his laughter immortalized in those snapshots. The memories flooded back, overwhelming yet comforting. I couldn't help but smile through the tears that welled up in my eyes. Even though I had strongly suspected that the online interaction was either an unusual AI or an earnest role-player, I had told him I loved him. To my surprise, and with a touch of humor, he had responded by saying he loved me too and concluded with, "Can't wait to meet you." After that, our conversation came to a close. As the weeks rolled by, I genuinely felt the happiest I had been in a long time. It had been challenging to cope without a father figure, ever since he succumbed to a heart attack a year prior to my departure for college. However, that brief exchange provided me with a sense of closure, allowing me to navigate my grief and begin the healing process. Occasionally, I would revisit that website, hoping for another message from him, but nothing appeared. It seemed to be a singular occurrence. In the following months, the conversation began to fade from my thoughts as I gradually resumed living my life fully. When Christmas arrived, I returned home to reunite with my family. It was our second holiday season without him, and his absence was still deeply felt. Nonetheless, we cherished the festivities, and I relished the time spent with my mother and brother. On the eve of my return to college, my mother recalled that she had something for me. She retrieved an old VHS tape, Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. Though I was familiar with VHS tapes, they had become obsolete for about 2 decades, leaving me puzzled as to why she was giving it to me. "Open it," she urged. I pried open the bulky case and peered inside. To my astonishment, it contained a trove of photographs of my father, affectionately known as Poppy. There were countless pictures of him, posing with our family, including my brother and me when we were mere infants. Each photo captured moments of joy and togetherness, bringing warmth to my heart despite the bittersweet pang of nostalgia. My dad posed with the dog too. It was a surreal moment, and I was too overwhelmed to ponder how these photographs had come to exist. There was a note attached, "To my brilliant children, may the force be with you." He always had a bit of a nerdy side, my mom remarked. I thought we didn't have any photos of Poppy. "I don't even recall your dad taking these." Her voice carried a tone of happiness and nostalgia that was palpable. "But your brother found them a few weeks ago." I gave her a warm hug and went off to find my brother. I expressed how wonderful it was that he had discovered them and began to browse through them. I shared with him all about the website and the enigmatic man from the past who claimed to be my father. We even had a chat about him taking pictures of the dog. He was glad to listen and sift through the photos with me, yet he remained his typically quiet self, offering only a few positive remarks about the pictures. He hadn't been quite the same since he passed, but it was heartening to see him smile for the first time in a long period. So that's my tale of the time-traveling conversation with my dad. Sometimes, it utterly unsettles me, and I find myself awake all night mulling over it. Other times, I feel a sense of comfort, knowing that something beyond my understanding occurred to me. Whether it was an exceptionally gifted hacker or a bizarre AI, I'm not sure. However, I've taken to steering clear of the dark web now. I think I was fortunate with this encounter. It was only a matter of time before I encountered someone who might misuse that information. I have so much to reflect on. It reminds me of my own theories regarding that story, but I'm eager to hear yours in the comments. If you're enjoying this so far, please remember to like the dark web video. Before I delve into the tale, I want to clarify that it happened many years ago, and I no longer indulge in such activities. Back then, I was young and naive, eager to impress a girl I liked. For legal reasons, I must stress that this entire story is fictional. In my early 20s, I started associating with a crowd that partied excessively. They experimented with various substances that I won't specify here. I tried my best to steer clear of those things, although I might have partaken a few times. My life was somewhat chaotic at that point. I won't offer too many justifications for why I spent time with these people, but one significant reason was this girl. She was exactly my type back then, with her long hair and playful, flirtatious demeanor. She was practically my dream girl. We struck up a conversation, and I asked her if she'd like to hang out sometime, to which she surprisingly agreed. A few days before she was supposed to come over and relax, she sent me a message asking if I had any of that good green stuff. I didn't smoke alone, only in social settings where it seemed necessary. However, instead of admitting that, I lied and assured her I did have some. Suddenly, I found myself in a panic, reaching out to everyone I knew to get some grass. No one could assist me, and I was desperate. In my desperation, I did the most foolish thing imaginable. I ventured onto the dark web. I secured a virtual private network to remain anonymous. After some thorough searching and inquiring, I finally stumbled upon a link purportedly leading to a marketplace on the dark web. My heart raced as I clicked on that hyperlink. The site exuded a suspicious aura and was unlike anything I had ever encountered on the conventional internet. There were no flashy advertisements or social media connections, just a straightforward page with a catalog of items. I perused the listings until I discovered what I was seeking. I contacted the seller and negotiated the specifics. Paying for it wasn't as simple as just pressing a button like on Amazon. They required cryptocurrency, so I had to figure out how to acquire some. It was rather frustrating and ended up costing me $50 for an item that should have been about $20, but I managed to sort it out. A few days later, a small package arrived. My heart raced as I opened it, but instead of what I had ordered, it contained random junk. I had been duped. Panic set in as I realized I was in way over my head. Shortly thereafter, I began receiving threatening emails from an anonymous source. They were aware of my activities and demanded more money, threatening to reveal my actions to the authorities if I didn't comply. I was ensnared in a twisted blackmail scheme. Every knock on my door made me jump in terror. I desperately sought a way out of this predicament. I found myself trapped in a dark web nightmare of my own creation, unable to see a way to escape. Call me a fool, because I truly am one, but I ended up sending the anonymous extortionists around $600 in total, about $100 every week. They just kept returning to blackmail me further. I continued sending payments until one day, fed up, I decided to quit and stop sending anything altogether. In the months that followed, I lived in constant dread, convinced that the FBI would burst through my door and arrest me. Now, looking back, it seems absurd. No one really cares about someone purchasing a small amount of green stuff online. But at the time, my mind wasn't in a good place. The most frustrating part was that the girl I liked didn't even seem to care about the whole ordeal. She came over, we had an amazing evening, and she didn't even bring it up. If there's a lesson to be learned from this experience, aside from steering clear of the dark web, it's that you shouldn't do drugs to impress someone, and you definitely shouldn't send $600 to people who are extorting you over a minor offense. This story may be brief, but it's true, so I'll recount it just as it happened. At that time, I was a 23-year-old man with a history of exploring the dark web, visiting random sites, and occasionally making purchases. Despite having no real problems before, I must admit I used no software or measures to safeguard myself. I simply dived in, trusting my antivirus to keep me safe. Ladies, you might want to cover your ears for this next part. Like many other young men, I watched adult content, and one evening, feeling particularly lonely, I stumbled upon some videos that were definitely not family-friendly. I sat at my laptop and took care of my needs. 2 nights later, I received an email, oddly enough, from what appeared to be my own email address. I had never seen anything like that before, so I clicked on it immediately, unable to describe the sensation that hit me was overwhelming. There was a video attached, showing me in my birthday suit, fervently playing rock paper scissors in my lap. Everything was visible, including my face, especially when I adjusted my seat at one point in the video, leaving no doubt about my identity. The email outlined a series of demands. I was to go online, purchase some Bitcoin or gift cards, and send them to him. Otherwise, the video of me would be sent to my family. The blackmailer had the audacity to list my family members' names, just in case I suspected he was bluffing. He imposed a 48-hour deadline and pointed out that he knew I had opened the email since he had access to my computer. He threatened that if I contacted the authorities or searched for ways to handle the situation, he would release everything. Call me crazy, but after mulling it over for a few hours, I decided my dignity was too valuable. I refused to pay someone to conceal an activity that nearly every adult in the world engages in. I called his bluff and enlisted a friend to help me clear any viruses from my laptop. He believed he had found how the blackmailer accessed my webcam, but we couldn't be certain. So, I made sure to disable the settings and placed a sticker over the camera. I reached out to everyone on the list he sent me, informing them that they might receive a video of me, and explained the situation. They all just laughed and told me I was gross. As far as I know, the blackmailer never sent the video, but I learned my lesson about engaging online. Of another unrelated story about the previous tenant or some peculiar habit they had. This pattern continued, and I began to feel a little uneasy around him. All of this unfolded just a few months ago during the summer. Until about 9 months back, I was living with my parents, waiting to secure a stable job before I could afford to move out on my own. Finally, I was ready to spread my wings. The neighborhood I chose wasn't exactly top tier, but it was far from the worst. Some of my new neighbors were quite friendly, even stopping by to welcome me with food offerings. However, the man residing on my immediate right was a different story. He wasn't exactly hostile, yet he seemed oddly familiar with me from the outset, as if we had been acquaintances for years. Each morning as I left for work, he would dart out of his house to share random anecdotes, like how the former occupant habitually turned the bathroom light on at 3 a.m. and left it burning until morning, or how they would bask in tea. He sunned for 5 hours straight. His tales were a peculiar mix, monotonous and disjointed, but before I could even process them, he would launch into prying questions, such as why I had been away for exactly 83 minutes the previous evening. His voice was distinctive, carrying a peculiar inflection that could best be described as that of an exuberant nerd, if you can picture that. This inflection could make his remarks sound accusatory at times, while at other moments, they seemed to be seeking confirmation. My replies to his odd comments were never intended to spark a deeper dialogue. I would merely chuckle and offer a brief response like, "I just needed to pick up some groceries for tomorrow." Yet, he was always quick to interject, eager to regale me with yet another unrelated tale about the former tenant's eccentricities. Noted with a concerned tone, her eyes narrowing slightly. The previous neighbor never took 83 minutes to fetch groceries. He'd often remark with an almost accusatory inflection, as if what I said was utterly absurd. I figured he was just a little peculiar and chose not to challenge him on his intrusive queries too much. This pattern continued for several weeks. He'd either dash out to question me about my daily activities or appear at odd hours to relay facts about my life. He'd inform me that he noticed I left at 8:33 that morning instead of my usual departure time of 8:26. My reactions varied. Sometimes I thanked him for the information, other times I was rather dismissive, yet I always remained cordial. He never seemed interested in any other type of conversation. He would share his observations and then depart. As months passed, his behavior persisted. Nearly every day, he'd intercept me in the morning or knock on my door to share something he had observed about me. He appeared harmless, so I allowed him to carry on in his peculiar manner. One evening, while heading out for drinks just across the street, I inquired of my other neighbor if she had ever encountered issues with him. She immediately paused and regarded me with a serious expression. "What happened?" she asked, genuinely concerned. I explained that he often approached me to point out when he noticed specific lights being turned on in my house at night or when changes occurred in my routine. Though not outright terrifying, it was undeniably unsettling. At this point, she turned off the music and set her glass down, her demeanor becoming more serious. "You need to be careful around him," she advised, her voice carrying a note of urgency. She appeared unsettled, as if I had stirred a deeply buried memory. "The people who resided in that house before you were incredibly kind. I can't prove it, but I am convinced that their disappearance is because of him." "Disappearance?" What did she mean by that? I pressed her to reveal more, but she merely offered an apology, turned the music back on, and shifted the topic, effectively ending our conversation. She did pause briefly to emphasize that I should ensure my doors were locked and to avoid inviting him over that night. As I made my way home, I observed his house intently while crossing the road. It was conspicuously dark. I had never really paid much attention to him, but I couldn't recall ever seeing his lights on after dusk, unlike every other home on the street, which had at least some lights illuminating various rooms. When I reached my door, I hesitated. I glanced towards his house once more and saw precisely what I had hoped not to, a flicker of light. He was watching me. How long had he been observing the neighbor's house to know I was there? Was this his sole activity, watching me? I went inside, recalling my neighbor's advice. How often do I forget to lock the door? Honestly, most nights, I don't even think to check. I clicked the lock and proceeded to the back door. I retrieved the key from its spot, confirming it was secure, then returned the key to its usual location and headed upstairs. Changing into my underwear, I slipped under the covers and reached over to turn off the lamp. It had been a long night, and I began to drift off quickly. Was that a knock I heard? I sat on the edge of my bed, listening intently, anticipating more knocks. After about a minute with no further sound, I convinced myself it had been a dream, as I was still half asleep. I lay back down and closed my eyes once more. But then, there it was again, an unmistakable noise. In a strange state of semi-consciousness and slightly inebriated, I turned on the light and headed to the window. Peering outside, I couldn't spot anyone or anything suspicious. The sound of the window opening was loud enough to alert any visitor of my presence. I called out into the night, asking if anyone was there. At this point, a reasonable person would have stepped into view to reveal themselves, but there was only silence. I was certain I had heard knocking. Wrapping my dressing gown around me, I descended the stairs, heading directly for the front door. Its shaded glass allowed me to partially see through, and there was unmistakably a figure standing outside. Fear mingled with frustration as I fumbled with the lock, swinging the door open in anger. "You were gone for 157 minutes, what on earth?" I snapped. This was the latest he had ever shown up, and everything about his actions irritated me. The fact that I had called out from the window with no response, only to find him standing with his nose nearly pressed against my door, was infuriating. "Why do you feel the need to inform me of this at such an hour?" I was almost asleep, I questioned. "You've been out very late. I know that. I'm an adult, after all. I can choose to stay out late if I wish." In that moment, I realized I was responding to his accusatory tone. I questioned if that was all he wanted to convey to me, that I had been out late. As he began to walk away, heading back to his home, I shouted after him, telling him I no longer wanted him knocking on my door. He didn't respond. He merely continued his stride toward his house and disappeared inside. I had endured his odd behavior for far too long and had finally resolved not to let him dictate my life schedule any longer. The next time he approached me, I would inform him that I didn't care and would simply continue on my way. I shut the door behind me and returned directly to my bed, still simmering with frustration over his intrusiveness and peculiar mannerisms. As I lay down, I closed my eyes, contemplating the words I would deliver to him the next time our paths crossed. Fatigue washed over me, making it easy to drift back into sleep. As anticipated, I experienced the strangest dream. After having a few drinks, my dreams always became exceptionally vivid. I could hear that incessant, gentle knocking, though this time it didn't jolt me awake. I nearly persuaded my subconscious to disregard the imaginary knocking, yet I remained acutely aware of each eerie detail unfolding in the dream. I started questioning whether I had locked the door. I remembered locking it earlier, but couldn't recall if I had done so again after opening it to confront him. My dreams were unnervingly realistic, and of all the scenarios I could conjure, did I truly have to envision him breaking into my house and climbing my stairs? It felt as though I had never been so consciously aware during any of my dreams. In this dream, I found myself immobilized, sleeping on my side with my back to the listened intently for any sound or movement outside. His breathing had been so tangible, almost as if he were truly there. If it hadn't been for the alcohol coursing through my veins, I would have undoubtedly awakened. This was without a doubt the most unsettling dream I'd ever experienced. I dreamt that he was climbing into bed beside me, wrapping his arm around my waist, and playing with my hair. The sensation filled me with revulsion, yet the gentle caresses oddly lulled me further into slumber. I was desperate to awaken at that moment, as my mind kept returning to the horrifying realization that I might not have locked the door. I needed to rise. His breath was so vivid, it felt undeniably real. His touch seemed genuine, unlike any dream I'd encountered before. I was imploring myself to awaken, yet I felt immobilized. Wake up, I commanded myself. Finally, my eyes fluttered open, but I could still sense his presence. Why didn't you lock the door? As his voice hit my ears, I bolted upright, fully alert. There he was, in my bed. Terrified, I screamed and fled down the stairs, bursting out into the chilly night. Still screaming, I dashed across the street and pounded on my neighbor's door. Shivering in nothing but my underwear and barefoot, I knocked vigorously and shouted her name until she appeared. In a daze, she opened the door, and I hurried inside. I breathlessly recounted what had transpired, pleading with her to secure the door and contact the authorities. We peered out the window, seeing my front door ajar, just as I'd left it. The police were en route, and my friend tried to console me as I changed into some of her clothes and recounted every detail. Minutes ticked by as we remained on high alert, straining to detect any noise or movement outside. I gazed out the window as my friend inquired whether I was certain he had been there, or if it was merely a bad dream. Doubt began to creep in since we hadn't seen him leave. I wasn't typically the anxious type, and I wouldn't concoct such an elaborate scenario out of mere fear. I clearly remembered him lying beside me, touching me, and speaking to me. It was real, I was sure of it. About 15 minutes later, the police arrived and began entering the house with their weapons drawn. We watched with bated breath, expecting them to emerge with him in handcuffs. They were inside for what seemed an eternity, and I started to suspect he might have barricaded himself in my room or something similar. After what felt like an endless wait, the officers began to exit my home, alone. He wasn't with them. I couldn't comprehend it. I wasn't imagining things. He was definitely in my house. Resolute, I went outside to speak with the police and inquire about his whereabouts, but they assured me they had found nothing and had thoroughly searched every corner. In a state of panic, I insisted that I wouldn't re-enter the house as long as he was still inside. Then, the unthinkable occurred. He emerged from his own house, standing there and simply observing. I was in a frenzy, demanding his arrest and asserting that he had been in my home. His expression remained unchanged, not even a flicker of recognition, as he turned and walked back inside. Yes, I was intoxicated and quite emotional at that moment, but I was astounded that they dismissed my claims. They reassured me that they had searched the entire premises and found no intruder. They said that the person I had accused of being an intruder was evidently in their own home, so I was advised to go inside and get some rest. There were no signs of forced entry, nor any damage or evidence suggesting an intruder's presence, leaving the authorities with little they could do. Despite my earnest pleading for them to at least question him, one officer eventually agreed to go over and speak with him. However, their conversation appeared to be quite brief. He confirmed that he initially came over to check on me, noticing I seemed drunk, and then promptly returned home. I was both enraged and horrified. Eventually, I re-entered my house and searched for any signs of his presence. I was nearly starting to question my own sanity until I examined the back door. It was unlocked, and the key remained in the lock, a practice I never followed. He had exited through the back while I hid across the street. He had been inside my house, and I felt utterly powerless. After securing every door properly, I headed up stairs. The twisted individual had even made my bed, leaving it impeccably neat with the covers and pillows arranged perfectly. He hadn't hurried out after I woke up. Instead, he tidied my bed and then left via the back door. I crawled into bed, attempting to sleep, but was overwhelmed by a musty odor. The foul scent of his unwashed body had permeated my sheets, and his smell lingered throughout my room. It took me hours to replace all my bedding and finally find some rest. The following morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of having been violated, yet I also found myself doubting the events of the entire night. The police had been inside my home. A group of men clad in heavy uniforms provided a possible explanation for the lingering odor. The key found in the back door might have been checked by them to see if it fit the lock, ensuring it hadn't been stolen. Even the neatly arranged pillows had their own rationale. I had told them he was in my bed. It was logical that they might have tossed the bedding onto the floor in their search for him, and perhaps one of them had taken the time to straighten it up for me afterward. I adhered to my usual morning routine, and at precisely 8:30, as I neared my front door, I inhaled deeply, bracing myself for his presence. I left the house and made my way toward the road, glancing in his direction. The moment I stepped outside, there he was, emerging from his house to greet me with clockwork precision. I froze, my body tensing, ready to scream or lash out if he dared to come too close. "You're running 3 minutes later than usual," he noted. "Did you remember to lock your door this time? If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe." When I was 12, we had a neighbor, a senior woman, yet surprisingly spry. We'd often see her around, effortlessly hauling weeks' worth of groceries up the hill as if it were nothing. She was outside tending to her garden almost daily, a formidable old lady. Unfortunately, she was far from friendly. If you greeted her, she'd suggest you run into the street. She despised people and was a dreadful neighbor, constantly complaining about the slightest disturbances. She would even appear late at night to scold you for being too loud, threatening to see all the police officers. Our family often found itself embroiled in numerous arguments with her whenever she came over to complain. She would hurl insults at us with a fierce intensity. My parents grew weary of her tirades and began retaliating, calling her old, miserable, and predicting that she would die alone. Although I didn't approve, I assumed it was just the adults blowing off steam. I even noticed her smiling as she left for home after these shouting matches with my parents. She had gained quite a reputation around town for being a witch. There were countless rumors about her being centuries old and possessing the vigor and strength of a 20-year-old man. People weren't entirely wrong about that. It was said that she performed rituals visible through her window and that she kidnapped and ate children. It was all nonsensical, yet at the time, I found it entertaining to believe. However, the truly frightening event occurred when I was alone at home, engrossed in my Nintendo game. I heard an unusual noise outside my window, akin to an animal scratching at a door. I paused my game and went to investigate. I was stunned by what I witnessed. There she was, in her backyard, clawing at a window with a screwdriver, attempting to break into the house. I opened the window and informed her that I had called the police. Without hesitation, she dashed back to her home. It was still so surreal to see this elderly woman running away with such speed. I did call the police and reported what had transpired. They assured me they were on their way and advised me to go upstairs and lock myself in the bathroom with. In just a few moments, an odor began to fill the air, causing me to panic. It was the unmistakable scent of SM. Oki. My immediate assumption was that she had somehow set the house ablaze. I rushed to the bathroom window, flinging it open, and that was when the reality of the situation dawned on me. The smoke wasn't emanating from my home, it was billowing from the house next door. For reasons unknown, her house had caught fire, and she was still trapped inside. By the time the fire department arrived, the entire structure had been consumed by flames. It was announced that she had perished in the blaze, and we attended her funeral, which was sparsely attended. The most chilling aspect of this tragic event was how it only served to fuel the rumors that she was a witch. After I had caught her attempting to abduct me, people speculated that she had to destroy everything and relocate to hide her true identity. I remain uncertain about what to believe, but I certainly relish recounting this tale every Halloween. Please leave a comment and like the video. Your support means a lot. My neighbor is quite peculiar. He never waves and always has a persistent scowl on his face. When we moved in, we were informed that he was on a certain unsavory list and advised to contact the authorities if we ever saw him interacting with children. One day, out of the blue, he knocked on our door. I had never spoken to him before, and without even a proper introduction, he launched into an explanation of why he was on the registry. He claimed that he inadvertently injured a child in a locker room while both were coincidentally unclothed. According to him, it was a straightforward case of mundane assault where both individuals just happened to be in their natural state. He repeatedly emphasized that he was absolutely not interested in children, and then he departed without even giving me a chance to speak. That was literally my first encounter with him, aside from the notification about him when we initially arrived. Strangely enough, that wasn't even the most unsettling aspect about him. At some point, he began constructing a sign in front of his house. It wasn't a small poster, it was a professionally printed piece on metal, mounted on two massive posts like the ones you might see outside a store or along the highway. The sign featured a picture of a puppy and included a long, rambling story about how someone allegedly ran over his dog on this road a decade ago. It was written in such a way that he seemed to be accusing the neighborhood of having murdered his dog. Adjacent to this sign, covering his entire fence, was an enormous banner that read, "We miss you." I'm not sure why it said that since he lived alone. Lastly, there was an even larger image of the puppy, which seemed unnecessary because, directly in front of the banner, sitting on a folding sea table, was the actual stuffed puppy. It appeared he had the dog preserved after it was run over. From my window, I could see that he would hide behind his fence for hours on end, peering at the puppy on the table as if waiting for someone to tamper with it. He maintained this behavior for days until he finally brought the stuffed animal inside. The puppy and the banner eventually vanished, but the metal sign was a permanent fixture. It remained there for years until a storm tore it down. I always wondered what he did with the dog afterward. Did he keep it stored away in a closet, or does he have it displayed somewhere in his home? One day, I finally got some answers. A friend of mine who works in construction was, amusingly enough, hired by our eerie neighbor to build a shed. Without any prompting, he told me that this neighbor kept an unsightly stuffed dog in his living room, treating it like a piece of decor, and he would talk to it incessantly. There were many other unsettling things about him, but the large puppy shrine stood out the most. I never saw him with any kids, but I'm always vigilant. Before diving into the story, there are several things I need to clarify about my country, South Africa, to ensure you fully grasp the context. In South Africa, it's common to have high brick walls equipped with electric gates, electric fences, and alarm systems because the crime rate can be quite intense. It's also typical for homes to have expansive gardens. My family and I are avid animal enthusiasts, so at the time, we had 6 dogs, 2 Shar-Peis, 2 German short-haired pointers, and 2 dachshunds. Given this, our dogs roamed freely within the garden, as it was securely enclosed. We usually kept the veranda door open during the day to let them move around as they pleased. Additionally, in South Africa, it's normal for an average family to employ a maid and a gardener. This isn't a luxury reserved only for the wealthy, unlike in some other countries. For our story, our maid is Ellie, and our gardener is Vince. This particular event occurred in 2007 when I was 9 years old. My older brother was 10, and we had just received our first cell phones. That day, my father surprised us with them after he got home from work. I believe we were quite young to own phones at that time, but they were meant for emergencies or to stay in touch with our parents. Nonetheless, this detail is crucial to the story. We typically kept the veranda door closed at night for security reasons, but I recall that particular evening being exceptionally warm. Naturally, on that night of all nights, the veranda door was left wide open, and the dogs were frolicking in the garden. My brother and I were in our parents' room, eagerly setting up our new cell phones. Ellie's daughter, who was 18 and like an older sister to us, was assisting my brother and me. My father was elsewhere in the house, while my mother was in the bath. I distinctly remember the maid's daughter remarking on how the dogs wouldn't quiet down and how irritating it was, which is why it caught my attention too. Sure, they barked, but it was usually the smaller dogs that made a fuss while the larger ones remained calm. Besides, the barking usually lasted only a few minutes before they settled down. Something was off that night because even the larger dogs were barking incessantly. My dad came into our room and mentioned that he, too, had noticed the dog's relentless barking, and he intended to check if everything was all right. I didn't feel any alarm, and I don't think my dad suspected anything was wrong either, as my brother asked to join him in investigating, and my dad agreed. I was obviously too absorbed in my new Sony Ericsson. My dad later mentioned that he had a terrible feeling because of this and due to the way our story unfolds. The dogs were behaving unusually. He called out to them, expecting them to come dashing toward him as they usually did. Tonight, however, they merely glanced at him before turning back to continue their frenzied barking at a shadowy corner at the bottom of the steps. Sensing something was amiss, my dad instructed my brother to go back into the house to fetch a flashlight, using it as a pretext to keep my brother away from the unsettling situation. Once my brother was safely inside, my dad cautiously approached the steps. He observed the dogs, who appeared to be snapping at something lurking just beyond sight in the dimness. As he neared the steps, he noticed the lamp lying shattered, and a wave of confusion swept over him. Inch by inch, he moved closer, but before he could fully comprehend the situation, it was too late. My dad, an experienced hunter and former military man, felt a chilling sensation against his temple, immediately recognizing it as the barrel of a gun. Emerging from the shadows were 4 men, their faces concealed by balaclavas, each brandishing a weapon. Stunned, my dad stood immobilized on the steps. The man with the gun pressed to his head was instantly hostile, demanding to know the whereabouts of my brother. He insisted he had seen my dad with my brother moments before, unaware that my brother had already retreated back inside the house. Ting on instinct, my dad blurted out that my brother had gone inside to activate the panic button. As he uttered these words, he noticed the men begin to panic, conversing rapidly in Zulu, a language they assumed my dad couldn't understand. What they didn't know was that my dad had spent his childhood on a farm, where he had become fluent in Zulu. The aggressive man brandishing the gun spoke in Zulu, declaring that the police would arrive at any moment and suggesting they should eliminate the man, take what they could, and flee. The others appeared uneasy, with one smaller individual visibly on edge, repeatedly expressing his inability to return to jail and insisting on escaping before the police arrived, which he feared would be soon. He was clearly panicked. Sensing an opportunity, my father capitalized on the man's fear by interrupting in English, pretending not to understand their conversation. He mentioned that our neighborhood typically had armed response vehicles patrol the area, and since my brother had activated the panic button so long ago, they would likely arrive any second. This seemed to work, as my father observed their plan falling apart. The smaller, frightened individual began to panic, urging the others to leave immediately to avoid capture. His anxiety appeared to unsettle the group, causing them to lose confidence and break into arguments. Their scheme was disintegrating, as one of their own described it. The aggressive man, who had been aiming the gun at my father, gradually lowered it as their internal conflict escalated, diverting his focus from my father to his crew. Seizing this chance, my father slowly retreated up the steps and dashed towards the house. Fortunately, as he reached the front door, my oblivious brother emerged with a flashlight. Without missing a beat, my father scooped him up under his arm and sprinted inside. He dashed into the house, leaving the door wide open behind him in his haste. It seemed foolish, but I think his only thought was to get my brother inside as swiftly as possible. The maid's daughter and I were completely unaware of the situation until my dad burst through the bedroom door, slamming it shut as he ordered us to head upstairs to the attic. "There are 5 men outside with guns," he warned, "they're here to harm us. Go upstairs now." My heart plummeted at his words. My body reacted instinctively, and I found myself racing towards the stairs. My mom emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, not far behind me. We huddled there in the darkness, enveloped by silence so profound you could hear a pin drop. We were all just straining to catch any sounds from the rooms below. My mom cursed, realizing neither she nor my dad had a phone. However, as luck would have it, I clutched my brand new Sony Ericsson in my hand. What better emergency to use it in than this one, right? My mom dialed the police, and unbelievably, when they asked for our address, they informed us it wasn't within their jurisdiction. "Sorry," they said, and the line went dead. We were now not only terrified but utterly bewildered. My mom started cursing like a sailor once more, and that's when my dad realized he hadn't closed the veranda door. What about Ellie and Vince, who were in their rooms, blissfully ignorant of the impending danger? He retrieved his firearm from the safe in the attic and instructed us to stay hidden, no matter what we might hear, and to not come downstairs. I was sobbing, pleading with my dad not to leave us, but he reassured us, telling us he urgently needed to find the others before any harm befell them. The realization that 2 more individuals were still at risk brought a fresh wave of tears. The maid's daughter was understandably beside herself with worry, fearing for her mother's safety downstairs. My father vanished, leaving the atmosphere thick with tension. We could still hear the dogs in a frenzy, signaling that those men remained on our property. My mother Hen called another number, reaching out to the armed security that patrolled the neighborhood. They assured her they would arrive in approximately 10 to 15 minutes and advised us to stay put and hidden until they sounded our gate's bell. We all sat in silence, dreading the possibility of hearing gunshots or any indication that the intruders had entered our home. Yet, there was only silence, with the dog's barks echoing outside. After what felt like an eternity, though it was likely just a few minutes, we heard footsteps approaching the stairs, causing my heart to race. I remember closing my eyes, hoping fervently it was my father with Ellie and Vince. Fortunately, it was them. We remained concealed for a while, not daring to utter a word. The dogs seemed to have calmed down significantly, though they barked sporadically. The intercom at the gate buzzed, and my father instructed us to hold on while he confirmed it was indeed the security company. Sure enough, it was them. He let them in, and the nightmare concluded. I recall standing up, my knees trembling from the adrenaline coursing through my body. The armed security somehow managed to alert the appropriate police for our area, and everyone began investigating the garden. They discovered that there were, in fact, 7 pairs of footprints, indicating that these individuals had bent the spikes on our wall to climb over. Consequently, we installed an electric fence shortly afterward. This meant there must have been 2 other individuals lurking in the shadows unseen by my dad, which is unsettling in its own way. South Africa is plagued by violent crime, and it is disturbingly common for torture and other horrific acts to occur during home invasions. At that young age, I was oblivious to the world's horrors and primarily feared for my family's safety. Now that I'm older, the mere thought of 4 women being in the house, with my mom clad in only a bath towel, still sends shivers down my spine. The police mentioned that the presence of so many men, rather than just 1 to 3, suggested they might have had malevolent intentions. I am profoundly grateful that nothing happened to my family and eternally thankful for my dad's quick thinking when it came to the panic button. I'm also relieved that my dad's knowledge of Zulu allowed him to turn the situation to our advantage. Lastly, my family will forever be indebted to our loyal dogs who alerted us that night. A terrifying and life-altering event would have undoubtedly occurred if it weren't for our extraordinary dogs. From that day forward, my dad always rewarded them with leftover rice or meat with their dinner. I'm certain there is a special place in heaven reserved for these angels. If you're enjoying the video, please leave a like. Hello, I'm a 20-year-old French girl. I'm sorry and I apologize in advance if there are any errors, and I hope you can understand me. To set the scene, I reside in a suburban area, within a small complex featuring 6 homes. The gate to our property is damaged and frequently remains ajar, providing easy access to our modest courtyard. My home is a single-story building with 4 bedrooms, mine being one of them. On the ground floor, there is a guest room that we have repurposed into a treatment space due to my medical conditions. It's where we store all the necessary equipment and medications. I also own a dog who is incredibly dear to me. He perceives everything and can even detect my epileptic seizures before they occur. He recognizes the nurse's approach by the sound of their tires as they drive into our yard, and he only barks when something is amiss. A nurse visits me 4 to 5 times daily for treatments, including infusions, which is a crucial aspect of my life. One morning, as part of our routine, my nurse Sandra arrived at 8 a.m. She administered my treatment, and we engaged in our usual conversation. After approximately 40 minutes, she departed, mentioning she might be slightly delayed for her next visit, but assured me not to be concerned. That day, my parents were at work, and I had a medical appointment scheduled for the morning. I was alone at home, except for the nurse's visits every 4 hours. Upon returning from my appointment, I settled onto the sofa with my dog, anticipating the next nurse's arrival. When I heard the noise of tires, I presumed Sandra was arriving ahead of schedule. However, my dog began to growl, which was out of character for him. I checked the clock. It was 11:50 a.m. I considered that Sandra might have swapped her schedule with a previous patient, as she occasionally did. I then heard there was a knock at the door, prompting me to answer it. Standing there was a young woman I had never met before. She introduced herself as Camille, a third-year nursing student, and explained that Sandra had sent her to administer my treatment. I wasn't suspicious, being accustomed to students visiting, though I found it slightly unusual since Sandra typically informed me in the morning or sent a message. Additionally, she never left a student alone on their initial visit. I guided Camille to the treatment room, showing her the way while she washed her hands. At that moment, my dog's behavior turned peculiar. He began to growl as she neared me and circled around protectively, so I decided to leave him in the living room and closed the door to keep him calm. I didn't pay much attention to Camille's actions as I was preoccupied with my phone. Then I noticed she was preparing a syringe instead of using the usual pre-made saline syringe. Looking up, I saw that my treatment ampules were untouched, yet I distinctly heard the sound of ampules breaking. Something felt amiss as she approached me with the syringe. Just then, I received a message from Sandra, stating she would be there in 5 minutes and asking me to begin setting up the equipment. I concocted an excuse, telling Camille I needed to use the restroom, and left her in the treatment room. My dog continued to bark and growl as I made my way to the downstairs bathroom. Once there, I sent Sandra a message about the woman, and she responded, having no idea what I was referring to. Terrified, I started crying in the bathroom. Camille came to check on me and asked if everything was all right. Everything seemed fine, I assured her. Yet, that's why I was startled when I heard the front door slam shut. 2 minutes later, it reopened, and Sandra's voice echoed through the house. Emerging from the bathroom, still in tears, I was met with Sandra's concerned inquiry about what had transpired. I recounted the entire situation to her and led her to the treatment room. Together, we contacted the police, who arrived promptly, examined the evidence, and collected samples from the syringe and other items Camille had prepared. The test results were alarming. The syringe contained a paralytic agent potent enough to immobilize a 120-kilogram man, and the IV held a highly concentrated medication capable of stopping a heart. To this day, Camille's true identity remains a mystery, and thankfully, I never encountered her again. She had taken all my opioids but left my tablet and computer untouched. In hindsight, I realized my dog had sensed Camille's malevolent intentions. I should have been more alert, especially since she was a stranger and came alone. My treatments are intricate, and I often contemplate what might have occurred if I hadn't checked my phone that day. I had buried this story in my memory until a few days ago when my girlfriend reminded me of it. We started dating at the end of my senior year, and before we became exclusive, I had used several dating apps, listing my Snapchat on many of my profiles. This detail is crucial. The apps never led to anything substantial. I would chat with people for a while, but eventually, the conversations would fizzle out. Once I began my relationship with my girlfriend, I deleted the apps, I never removed my ACO. My social media accounts were still active, meaning people could view my profile and my Snapchat account. I came to this realization when a few individuals started adding me. It didn't trouble me much because I would simply inform them that I had a girlfriend. Naturally, the conversation would typically end there. However, there was one exception, someone who added me, whom we'll refer to as Adam. He asked if I was available. As a straight guy, I was accustomed to being added by other guys, so I gave him my standard response. Sorry, I'm straight and I have a girlfriend. I anticipated that he would leave me alone, but he persisted. Initially, the messages were ordinary, questions like, "How was your day?" or "What did you do today?" Simple, everyday topics. Being the amicable person I am, I replied, thinking he simply wanted to be friends, and I had no issue with having a gay friend. Then, the messages gradually took a more unsettling turn. Adam began inquiring about my girlfriend, and not just the usual questions. Over time, I started to notice that Tyler's way of speaking was eerily similar to Adam's. I wasn't entirely sure, so I refrained from jumping to conclusions. I shared Tyler's Snapchat with my girlfriend, who added him to do a bit of investigating. As soon as she added him, Tyler reacted intensely, confirming that it was indeed Adam. Upon realizing this, I blocked him once more. After that, I didn't hear from Adam for about a month. I was living in the suburbs of Chicago, and both my girlfriend and I resided just a few houses apart. We often saw each other, and our families were close friends. A month passed without incident until, unexpectedly, I received a letter. With no address or name on it, just my name emblazoned on the front, I opened it. To my utter shock and dismay, it turned out to be a love letter from Adam. The letter conveyed his affection for me and expressed his longing for us to run away together. Midway through, the letter took a highly sexual turn, with vivid descriptions of his intentions towards me. In that moment, two terrifying realizations dawned on me. First, he had my address, and second, he had personally delivered the letter, indicating he was in my town. I immediately contacted my girlfriend, who was equally appalled. After discussing the situation with my parents, we decided to notify the police. Unfortunately, since I had blocked and removed Adam's social media information, and the letter lacked a return address. There was nothing they could do. Day after day, letters continued to appear in my mailbox, until they began showing up at my girlfriend's place as well. Her letters were far more disturbing than mine. Adam expressed his hatred for her and described in detail the harm he wished to inflict upon her, hoping she would end our relationship. Like me, she reported this to the authorities, but there was nothing they could do. My girlfriend's family planned a trip to Hawaii, and I was entrusted with house sitting for them. The initial days went smoothly until one of the final nights of the week. As usual, I was at their house, comfortably watching TV on the couch, when suddenly the power went out. It was around 1 a.m., and the room was enveloped in total darkness. The next few moments were eerily silent, until I heard the shattering of a window from the office. To help you comprehend the layout of the house, when you entered the front door, the living room lay to your left. Directly ahead were both the kitchen and the staircase, and to the right were the office and dining room. Upstairs, upon reaching the top of the stairs, a bathroom was straight ahead. My girlfriend's room was to the right, and the other bedrooms were on the left. I immediately grabbed a kitchen knife and dashed upstairs to hide while I called the police. I quickly slipped into my girlfriend's room and concealed myself in the closet. As soon as I managed to contact the operator, I heard the intruder pounding up the steps. Fortunately, I was able to relay all the information to the operator in time, and she remained on the line as we both stayed silent. The intruder turned left when he reached the top of the stairs, which provided more time for the police to arrive and for me to prepare myself in case I needed to defend myself. A few minutes passed before I heard the intruder start moving toward my girlfriend's room. In the precious seconds I had, I slipped out of the closet and positioned myself beside the door. As soon as he opened the door and began to enter the room, I plunged the kitchen knife into his shoulder. A young man screamed in agony as I heard a heavy metallic object make a loud thud as it hit the floor. From there, I bolted out of the house, where I was met by 4 squad cars and officers with their guns drawn. I raised my hands, shouting that he was upstairs in the right room. Minutes slipped by as the intruder was hauled away, still howling in agony, with the siren lights bathing the street in a harsh glow. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of his face. It was Adam. Later, an officer informed me that the metallic sound was due to him dropping his firearm. Adam, originally from Texas, had traveled to my state to be with me. He had rented a room at a nearby motel and would place letters in both my girlfriend's and my own mailbox every day. He did this in the early morning hours, a fact confirmed by surveillance footage from the motel where he was staying. On the night of the break-in, Adam intended to harm my girlfriend and her family, so I would choose him instead. He managed to tamper with the power box, cutting off electricity to her house and the neighboring ones before breaking in, expecting her to be there. Fortunately for us, she was away on a tropical vacation. Honestly, I shudder to think how different things might have turned out had they not gone on that trip. I am profoundly thankful that my girlfriend and her family are still alive. To any stalkers out there, please stay away from her. This incident occurred over a decade ago, yet I will never forget the deep-seated feeling in my chest that night and the following morning when the true nature of the situation became apparent. It was late December in a small Texas town, and we had just received 5 inches of snow earlier that morning. I can't recall the exact time, only that it was dark outside while I was engrossed in playing. It's crucial to mention that my room consisted of 2 distinct sections. An anteroom with a door that led to the front, followed by my actual sleeping quarters. The door was an antiquated wooden one, complete with all its original hardware, and it featured a window on the upper half. Although it had a window shade, it wouldn't prevent anyone from peering inside if they were inclined to do so. My room was located at the forefront of the house, with my parents' room situated at the back. I was in my room, engrossed in playing with my Hot Wheels cars, when I sensed something peculiar, as though someone was observing me. At the time, I was facing the door and glanced directly at the window, trying to concentrate on the tiny gaps left by the window shade, searching for any indication that might make me feel unsafe and prompt me to flee. After a while, I convinced myself there was nothing to worry about, so I resumed playing. A few minutes later, that same unsettling feeling returned. This time, instead of looking at the door, I repositioned myself so my back was facing it, hoping it was merely my imagination. Just then, the most terrifying event occurred. There was a sound at the door, as though someone had touched the doorknob. I remained turned away, utterly immobilized by the soft sound of the doorknob moving. I couldn't fathom how or why, but it was indeed moving, slowly turning and testing the lock. I longed to move, but I was paralyzed, as if every joint in my body had been glued. My chest felt as though a car was parked on it. My parents were in the shower at the far end of the house, leaving me alone at the front. The only room illuminated was mine. Suddenly, the knob was no longer being gently tested. Someone was forcibly turning the knob, and I knew that this door required locking from the inside to allow it to open freely. Fortunately, there were 2 deadbolts in place. Whoever was on the opposite side had just realized the knob was free to turn. The moment I heard it rotate fully, I leapt to the wall about 5 feet away from the door, pressing my back against it. The door fell silent, and I found myself immobilized, unable to move. Then, the knob began to turn slowly. I vividly recall watching and waiting for it to complete its turn. When it did, the person on the other side began to push and pry at the door. At first, their efforts seemed gentle, but then they started kicking the door forcefully with their foot. They managed only 2 kicks before I unfroze and screamed for my life. I dashed to the back of the house to alert my parents. When they asked what was wrong, I told them someone was attempting to break in. They rushed over and checked the door but didn't bother to look outside, despite my pleas. They dismissed my fears, attributing them to an overactive imagination, suggesting it was merely an animal or the old age of the house. They took one last glance into my room without investigating further and instructed me to go to bed. It took me hours to fall asleep. I don't even remember the moment I drifted off. What I do remember is lying in bed, staring unblinkingly at the door, my gaze never leaving the doorknob. Suddenly, my parents woke me up. They appeared visibly distressed and seemed frightened. My mom took hold of my shoulders, positioning herself directly in front of me. She asked with an unwavering sternness why I believed someone had tried to break in. When I shared the situation with them this time, they actually paid attention. I was concerned about how seriously they seemed to take it, as they inquired about every detail. Once I finished recounting everything, they said there was something I needed to see. They led me to the front door and out into the yard. Pointing toward my door near the driveway, it was impossible to miss the boot prints imprinted in the snow, leading from the street, through our yard, directly to my window, and then to my mudroom door where I had been playing the previous night. The police arrived and took a report, but nothing ever materialized from it. I never managed to sleep peacefully in that house again. The experience of going through this as a child, without my parents believing me, is something I can never erase from my memory. I'm just relieved I wasn't home alone and incredibly grateful for that sturdy door. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe. I always appreciate reading your thoughts in the comments. About a decade ago, I lived by myself and seldom had visitors. I was quite downhearted at the time, having lost my girlfriend in an accident with a drunk driver. One evening, I was savoring a beer and watching the sunset from the back porch when I noticed a large, disheveled man emerging from the tree line. My heart raced as he advanced toward my house in a threatening manner. Living alone, I frequently used my backyard for target practice, and in that moment, I was profoundly thankful for it. Instinctively, I rushed to secure all the doors while desperately dialing the police. What I wasn't aware of was that this intruder had broken in the previous day through a basement window and had spent the night squatting there. There, he had inadvertently left the basement door unlocked, and now he was making his way into the house, heading up the stairs in my direction. Gripping my rifle, I aimed at the figure advancing down the hallway. I shouted, commanding him to halt and lie on the ground, but he continued his relentless approach. I discharged the first round, low. Added with rock salt, but he seemed unfazed. I swiftly followed up with a rubber bullet to his chest, yet the man, clearly under the influence and out of his mind, persisted in moving forward. He was enormous, at least twice my size, and it dawned on me that whatever substance coursed through his veins was rendering him impervious to the pain a rubber bullet could inflict. He was backing me into a corner, and in desperation, I pleaded with him to stop, warning him of the consequences. He only groaned like a zombie, taunting me to shoot. Then, in a sudden lunge, he charged at me. My third shot left a gaping hole in his chest, but it barely slowed him. He kept coming and, in a frenzied struggle, wrestled me to the ground. He was moaning and coughing up blood. In an alarming turn, He clasped my face with both of his massive hands, squeezing my head with terrifying force. It felt as though he was trying to crush my skull like a balloon. I couldn't discern how long the ordeal lasted. It seemed like an eternity, but eventually, the wound took its toll, and he perished on top of me. I lay there beneath his weight for several minutes, utterly exhausted and barely able to breathe. With his weight pressing down on me, his body forced my rifle into my chest, causing intense pain. As I shifted his body to the side, I found myself completely soaked in his blood, and the overpowering stench remains vivid in my memory. I had entirely forgotten that I was still on the call with the operator, Eder, who had listened to our entire interaction. It mainly consisted of my desperate pleas for him to stop or I'd be forced to shoot, while the man responded with threatening taunts. The police arrived shortly after, and the incident was covered by the local newspapers. A criminal investigation ensued, but I was eventually exonerated from any wrongdoing. It was later revealed that the intruder was wanted for the murder of an elderly couple in Baltimore and had somehow traveled 50 miles up the road into a rural area. Years ago, I worked the night shift at a hotel in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. During the peak season, it was manageable, with mostly families and tourists visiting. We had on-site security at that time. However, the off-season during the winter months presented a different scenario. The affordable weekly rates we offered attracted many unsavory individuals. The original plan was to generate revenue during the off-season by renting to snowbirds, older retired individuals who would spend a month or so at the beach during the winter. Unfortunately, it didn't always go as planned. The low rates allowed an undesirable crowd to become long-term residents. I've encountered more than my fair share of meth labs, broken up physical altercations, and other incidents while working the third shift during the winter months. I would encounter some intriguing individuals during the cold season, as the chilly weather often drove homeless people indoors to seek warmth and grab a complimentary coffee. Although I wasn't officially allowed to let them, I lacked the heart to be unkind. I would permit them to take a coffee and warm themselves for a short while, provided they didn't cause any issues. As you might imagine, working the night shift during winter led to some bizarre and occasionally unsettling tales. I have amassed quite a few, but this particular one stands out because it ended poorly for me. The night had been fantastic up until then. I had attended an independent wrestling event with my best friend before heading to work. In fact, I had agreed to start an hour earlier the following evening to help out the young lady who usually worked the second shift, in exchange for her covering an extra hour for me. Coincidentally, I met Terry Funk that night, a wrestling legend renowned for his hardcore matches. Little did I know, I was about to face a similar kind of violence in reality. I was expected to start my shift at midnight because of the extra hour. Whoa. RKED for me. Ordinarily, I began at 11 p.m. I counted the cash register, and she filled me in on everything that had transpired during her shift, as usual. As she left, my friend Andrew arrived. He worked as a maintenance technician for the second shift at this hotel and two others owned by our company. He would often drop by after work, grab us some food, and we would indulge in playing World of Warcraft on our laptops after eating, given that business was slow. He was just collecting my money for the food and getting ready to leave, and I was eagerly telling him about how much fun I had. I had a wonderful time at the wrestling event, proudly showcasing my Terry Funk t-shirt. I was just heading into the back office to hang up the shirt when I heard the doorbell chime, signaling that a customer had entered. The saying is true. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. I had turned around upon hearing someone speak loudly, yet I still couldn't discern their words. I had just reached the doorway when I saw Andrew collapse in front of me. Suddenly, a man appeared from around the corner and struck me on the head with a short steel pipe in his hand. The blow disoriented me, and I collapsed to the floor. Before I could react, he hit me again in the head with the pipe. Out of nowhere, I heard another man, whom I hadn't noticed before, in a state of panic. He was worried because he thought one of us had run to alert the police. They fled through the door, and I was finally able to get back on my feet. I attempted to call the police using the phone in the back office, but it was malfunctioning. In frustration, I slammed it down. I was in pain, terrified, and completely freaking out. It dawned on me that they might return, so I hurried to lock the door. I was anxious because I had no idea where Andrew had gone. I dialed 911 and began to feel the blood trickling down my head. I informed the operator that I had been attacked and urgently needed an officer and an ambulance. Next, I contacted Travis, the hotel manager, to report what had occurred. Initially, he thought I was playing a prank, as we often teased each other when bored. However, I eventually managed to convince him of the seriousness of the situation. He wasn't kidding, so he informed me he was coming over immediately. The police officers and the ambulance arrived, and I opened the door just as they pulled up. It was then that I discovered that after being sucker punched and knocked to the ground, Andrew had astonishingly leapt over the desk and made his escape. He dashed out just as a police car was passing by, and he managed to flag it down for assistance. I ended up in the hospital's emergency room where I needed 10 staples in my scalp, and they administered additional morphine for the pain. After receiving treatment, I had no means of getting home, but the doctor and nurses took pity on me and covered the cost of a cab. My intention was to return to work because it was December, and Christmas was approaching. I had 3 children and needed as many work hours as I could get. When I returned to the hotel, the IT guy, Ted, was there with his wife, Barbara, who also worked at the front desk. She was taken aback to see me, thinking I would still be in the hospital. I initially believed I had been struck on the head just once after being punched, but the video footage Ted was retrieving for the police painted a different picture. After I hit the ground, the assailant had struck me not just once, but a total of 10 times. I kept attempting to grab the pipe and stand up, however, I don't recall much of it, likely due to the severity of the blows. He continued to punch and hit me with the pipe until his accomplice alerted him that Andrew had escaped and contacted the police. At that point, both perpetrators fled the scene. I was provided with a room at a nearby hotel, and Ted and Barbara offered me a place to stay, as I was in no condition to drive. The morphine they administered also granted me a paid week off to recuperate. They transferred me to the other hotel for the night shift over the course of a month, just in case I was being targeted specifically. We never uncovered the reason behind the attack on me. The police speculated that it could have been a failed robbery attempt, given that Andrew managed to escape and I didn't go down easily. The uncertainty of why they targeted me left me deeply unsettled. Even when I resumed work at the other hotel on the night shift, a lingering nervousness persisted. I tensed up every time the door chimed, but I couldn't afford to resign. As I mentioned, I had 3 children to support. To my knowledge, they never apprehended the culprits. Approximately 2 months later, while I was working the second shift, a detective visited. He showed me a series of mugshots and inquired if any of the faces seemed familiar. The events had unfolded so quickly that I hadn't gotten a clear look at the assailants. I had watched the surveillance footage, though the quality was poor, and despite that, 2 of the individuals looked strikingly familiar. I pointed them out, and he inquired about my level of certainty. I admitted that I was about 85% sure. He then raised his voice and questioned if I wanted someone incarcerated for attempted murder on an 85% certainty. His reaction left me speechless. I was the victim, attacked without provocation, and yet he was yelling at me as though it were my fault. I was preoccupied with defending myself to get a detailed look at them. I no longer work night shifts at a hotel, and I'm relieved because it's simply too perilous in this area. Night shifts at hotels can be fraught with danger, and after my harrowing ordeal, I realized it was time for a change. For a period, the memories of that night tormented me. The sensation of being utterly exposed, the agony from the assault, and the persistent questions about the attacker's motives weighed heavily on my mind. Yet, as time passed, I began to recover both physically and emotionally. I secured a new job with better working hours and conditions, which afforded me the chance to spend more time with my children. The sense of safety and security that had been shattered on that dreadful night slowly returned. Life moved forward, and I left the hotel industry behind. I realized that sometimes it's crucial to prioritize your well-being over financial concerns. My new job allowed me to support my family while maintaining a more stable work-life balance. I never discovered what drove the attackers that night. They remained at large, leaving behind a trail of questions and unresolved mysteries. However, I chose not to linger on the past but to look ahead to a brighter future. Although the scars on my scalp serve as a physical reminder of that harrowing night, they also symbolize my resilience and capacity to overcome adversity. It was a chapter of my life that had concluded, and I was determined to write a new, safer, and happier story for myself and my family. Please remember to like the video if you're enjoying the stories, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe if you haven't already. I need to preface this by saying that I don't believe in ghosts or any other kind of paranormal activity. This is not an attempt to persuade people of their existence. I must admit that I possess an open mind when it comes to phenomena I cannot explain through logic or reasoning. I am aware that something inexplicable occurred to me, though I remain clueless as to its nature. None of the explanations I've encountered have come close to providing a satisfactory answer. What unnerves me most is that if I could simply attribute it to seeing a ghost or experiencing a glitch in the matrix, as some often describe, I could at least put it behind me. However, I am unable to do so because neither I nor anyone else has any idea what truly transpired that night. I previously worked for a security Thai company that provided overnight services for large office buildings in downtown Houston. Some of these buildings were incredibly upscale, with security offices equipped with amenities that others lacked. The downside was that these shifts were among the most monotonous imaginable. The more challenging parts of the job could be draining and hazardous, but boredom is an entirely different kind of affliction. So, you can understand why I never anticipated that my most terrifying night working in security would occur in these locations. They wouldn't even make it into the top 10. One of the buildings we were assigned to had multiple offices on each floor, arranged in a U-shaped layout. Each floor was primarily occupied by a different company, leading to varied designs but maintaining the same overall structure. Part of that structure included those polished. The metal panels positioned at each corridor's corner were set at 90-degree angles, forming a U-shape. Initially, I thought it was merely an unusual design choice, but then I realized they functioned like mirrors. If someone was walking down the connecting corridor and was out of your sight, you could still detect subtle movements in the polished metal, preventing any accidental collisions with colleagues. Quite ingenious, don't you think? Well, let me tell you about something interesting. One night, I was on the overnight shift with 2 other colleagues. When my turn came to conduct a physical sweep of the building, I took it seriously. Although most of the premises were monitored with cameras, no competent security guard relies solely on electronics. Therefore, every half hour, one of us would take a brisk walk through each floor to ensure everything was in order. While most of the team preferred using the elevators, I opted to take the stairs a few times each night for some physical activity. I was carrying a bit more weight than I liked, and even climbing 5 or 6 flights was challenging. I would climb as many flights as I could bear and then use the elevator for the remainder. It was also a good way to pass the time during those grueling shifts. On one occasion, I managed to hustle all the way up to the 9th floor, setting a personal record. However, I was utterly exhausted and had to lean against the wall to catch my breath, making sure to stay out of the CCTV's blind spots so my coworkers wouldn't see and tease me about it. Once I composed myself, I stepped into the corridor and headed toward the first turn in the U-shaped layout I had mentioned earlier. As I approached within a few feet of it, I suddenly stopped. For the first time since I had begun working there, I noticed a reflection in a polished metal mirror. It wasn't perfectly clear, but it was undeniably different from its usual appearance. I had memorized the typical reflective image, having seen it countless times each night. I could distinctly make out someone standing in the adjoining hallway, dressed in what appeared to be the same type of security uniform that I wore. I called out, thinking it was one of my colleagues. Then, the figure in the white shirt quickly moved out of view. Immediately, I suspected it was a prank. I thought they were trying to scare me. As I walked around the corners, I was calling out, "Hey, I know you're there. I saw you in the reflection." I rounded each corner, but there was no one in sight. I assumed whoever it was had slipped into one of the conference rooms or offices. As a precaution, I checked all of them, and they were completely empty. I radioed down to confirm if someone was indeed up there with me, perhaps hiding in a closet or something, because they were a group of immature pranksters. But as soon as I heard both guys speaking on the same radio, I felt a slight chill creep in. Either I was experiencing some strange episode from power walking up those 9 flights and my eyes were deceiving me, or something else was going on. Something very unsettling was happening, so naturally, I began to feel a bit anxious, not overwhelmingly so, just mildly concerned. I decided to take the elevator for the remainder of the way. Although I was still worried about my health, as I turned back toward it, something occurred that chills me even to this day. It felt as if someone rapidly approached from behind. I distinctly heard footsteps that were definitely not my own and sensed that familiar feeling of imminent danger, the kind you experience when someone suddenly closes in on you from behind. I quickly turned, my hand instinctively reaching for my sidearm, ready to defend myself, but there was nothing there. Just an empty corridor with only me standing in it. I struggled to find the words to describe the kind of fear I felt at that moment. The best I can express is that it was like a tangible force. That fear struck me, propelling me towards the elevator at a brisk pace. I was convinced that someone was there with me, yet they would have had to possess either psychic abilities or ninja-like stealth to approach me so quietly or at least give me the impression of being stalked. None of it made any sense, and increasingly, I started to believe there was something wrong with me, not that anything peculiar was actually happening. Once I was safely inside the elevator, I contacted my colleagues to ask them to monitor all the cameras on the 10th floor for any signs of movement. They responded by checking if I was alright or if I needed assistance, probably because they could detect the state I was in. But I told them to keep quiet, watched the surveillance feeds and told me whether they captured anything or anyone. I was bracing myself for a negative response, in which case I would have had to face the reality that I might be experiencing some kind of medical emergency, possibly requiring a call to 911. I had heard stories about people suffering from strokes or heart attacks, how they could feel disoriented or panicked, and that was all my hypochondriac mind could focus on. But then, as my radio crackled back to life, I heard the next thing they said, and I swear to all that's holy, I felt like I was going to be sick. My coworker came back with confirmation, saying, "Yeah, there's someone up there with you. We're on our way to the elevator now." I had already sent it down to the ground floor, and to be honest, I was strangely relieved. I wasn't about to have a stroke, and I wasn't losing my mind. There genuinely was someone on the 10th floor, and they were about to face the consequences for giving me such a fright. We methodically checked all the rooms together, calling out to this potential intruder the entire time, with phrases like "come on out" and "you're only getting trespassing," even going as far as to say "this is a heck of a way to get yourself shot." We were bluffing, of course, and it wasn't a major problem that we didn't locate this intruder. They could have easily used the stairwell to slip away to another floor. Instead of pursuing them, we just returned to the security office, monitored the cameras, and waited for the police to arrive. On our way back to the office, I asked my coworker what exactly he had seen on those security cameras, and it turns out I hadn't observed anything conclusive, just enough indistinct motion at the periphery of a monitor to realize that someone was undoubtedly up there. They appeared to be well aware of where the camera's blind spots were. This realization truly set off alarm bells for my colleague. Such behavior implies that someone has scoped out the location, possibly conducting a bit of reconnaissance during the day, perhaps disguised as a client or an employee. They knew exactly where to go to obtain whatever they sought, as well as how to reach their destination without being immediately detected. Many people have questioned how this individual could have initially entered the building and whether that fact bothered me. The question did trouble me, but we aren't trained to dwell on the how. Our training focuses on reacting to intruders as and when they appear, concentrating on either detaining them for the authorities or ensuring they leave the premises without anyone getting injured. The how is contemplated afterward. In the moment, the focus remains on the intruder. Regardless, we monitored the cameras, contacted the police, and tried to determine where this intruder might have gone while evading all the security cameras. We scrutinized the footage for about 15 to 20 minutes before the police arrived, and we didn't observe any movement. Once the officers were on the scene, we assisted them in sweeping through all the floors and offices to ensure no one was present. They were quite thorough, opening closets and checking beneath desks, yet we still found no one. Even the officers remarked that it must have been eerie for whoever was there. Being up there alone felt like the understatement of the century, but in that moment, as we grappled with the situation, I was convinced that I wasn't losing my mind. The situation seemed to be sorting itself out, allowing me to regain a sense of calm once more after the police departed. We activated the alarm systems for floors 9 to 13, ensuring that if anyone set foot on those levels again, we'd be promptly alerted and a 911 call would automatically be made. Fortunately, no alarms were triggered that night, leading us to believe the incident was essentially concluded. We knew we needed to discuss the matter with the head of security, who would undoubtedly be eager to understand how such an oversight occurred, though no one anticipated any terminations as a result. In the following weeks, I came to realize the profound impact the experience had on me. The more time passed and I pondered over it, the more unsettled I became. I thought I had moved on, but that assumption proved to be a significant lapse in judgment, or perhaps I just chose to ignore my emotions. I found myself contemplating what could have produced those unsettling noises and reflections, and what might have given me the sensation of someone rushing up behind me. After much deliberation, I concluded that I no longer wished to work there. When I learned that I couldn't select my preferred guard shifts, I was compelled to search for employment elsewhere. I admit without hesitation that I was frightened by whatever transpired up there, and rather than descending into a convoluted attempt to rationalize it, I believed it was wiser to move on. The urge to leave everything behind and begin anew somewhere else is a feeling that has yet to revisit me. However, you can be absolutely certain that if it ever does, I won't hesitate to leave. A few years back, I found myself residing in Colombo, Sri Lanka, in a modest hostel situated on the outskirts of the city. This establishment primarily accommodated long-term occupants, allowing me to become quite familiar with everyone living there. Among these residents was a man named Raj, who operated as a sort of intermediary within the local gambling establishments. The casinos in the vicinity were notoriously dubious venues, teeming with Russian mobsters and other unsavory characters from China and India. Although these casinos were technically outlawed, they managed to sustain their operations through bribery and governmental complicity. I ventured into one of these establishments once, and the experience was nothing short of surreal. Raj's role involved accepting online wagers from clients in India and subsequently placing these bets in person at the casinos. Essentially, he played with their funds, serving as the bridge that allowed people to gamble remotely. He engaged in high-stakes games, managing substantial amounts of money for influential individuals, making it a disaster waiting to unfold. One evening, Raj made a monumental mistake. A client of his somehow breached his online system and absconded with all the funds had other clients had deposited for gambling purposes. The stolen sum was considerable, with some clients losing in excess of $50,000, a small fortune in that region. We only became aware of the theft following Raj's abrupt disappearance, which led us to uncover the truth about the incident. Enigmatic note left on his bed read, "It's sad. Don't look for me. I'm leaving," among other mysterious phrases. The man had disappeared without a trace overnight. We filed a police report and waited anxiously for any updates. After a few days, the police returned to the hostel, seeking someone familiar with Raj to accompany them. The locals staying at the hostel were hesitant to go with the police, so I volunteered. They escorted me to their headquarters, leading me to a back room where I was shown photographs of a body that had been ruthlessly dismembered and discarded in the nearby sewer canal. It was Raj, brutally torn apart by an unknown assailant. They had brought me there to identify the body, but the culprit behind this horrific act was never discovered. The haunting images from those photos have seared into my memory, and I doubt I'll ever forget them. I left the hostel not long after. While it's possible Raj might have been tangled in some dubious dealings, he certainly didn't deserve such a horrific end. Remember to like the video and thank you for your support. I work as a baker in a small bakery located in a tourist town. My work usually begins around midnight most nights. Being quite close to the local strip of bars and clubs, I frequently hear the echoes of late-night revelers, sirens blaring a few times each night, and the shouts of partygoers. The strangest story, which started off quite eerie yet concluded unexpectedly, occurred when I answered a knock on the door around 4 a.m. The only reason I opened the door was that my boss had just texted me, informing me that we might receive an early delivery, so I assumed that was what it was. I opened the door and, as I glanced around, finding no one in sight, I assumed they must have knocked and then retreated to their truck to begin unloading. Suddenly, someone emerged from the shadows, bearing a striking resemblance to Slender Man. I felt a wave of panic but managed to maintain my composure fairly well. Once they stepped fully into the light, it was clear they weren't a monster. Instead, it was just a tall, slender girl wearing no pants or shoes, and a shirt that was evidently not her own. The poor girl approached me and asked if she could borrow a phone. In that moment, everything clicked. I had an idea of what might have happened. I invited her inside and let her use my phone. She attempted to contact her boyfriend and explained that she had just woken up after losing consciousness. She was disoriented and didn't know her location, noting that mine was the only house with a light on in the entire street. I refrained from asking for details, but she mentioned something about brandishing a firearm earlier and was clearly anxious about the police being alerted, so I decided not to call them. Her boyfriend never picked up, but I assisted her in figuring out the location of her hotel, which, fortunately, was on the same block. I couldn't accompany her on foot or by car because I had numerous things cooking in the oven. I ended up giving her my phone, with the hotel address open on Google Maps and the flashlight turned on. She made her way there safely, returned, took a shower, had a nap, and brought my phone back to me later that morning. She hugged me twice, expressing her gratitude profusely, and I sat there thinking, wow, I didn't expect to see my phone again, but I'm relieved everything turned out fine. I still don't know if she was assaulted or if it was just one of those situations. Away the unsettling feeling creeping over me, but the tension in the air is palpable. It's like the whole store is holding its breath, waiting for the next move in this odd dance. He'll ends in closer, his eyes glinting mischievously under the flickering fluorescent lights. I'm caught between the urge to bolt and the morbid curiosity of his confession. Just as I'm about to ask him what he means, he suddenly steps back and bursts into laughter, the sound echoing eerily in the emptiness of the store. It's a laugh that seems to fill the entire space, bouncing off the shelves and making the shadows seem even more menacing. I force a chuckle, trying to match his energy and diffuse the situation, but my heart is racing a mile a minute. Then, as abruptly as he appeared, he turns and strides away, disappearing down one of the aisles. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. The store feels even more deserted now, the silence stretching endlessly around me. I shake my head, trying to dismiss the encounter as just another bizarre night at the 24/7 Walmart, but a part of me can't shake the feeling that something more sinister is lurking behind that grin. He tries to brush it off with a nervous laugh, but it doesn't work. The man's persistent gaze remains fixed on him, a grin still etched on his face. It's late, the surroundings are eerily quiet, and the place already has a creepy vibe. But this guy? He's cranked it up to an 11. He starts trailing me, aisle after aisle. Every time I glance over my shoulder, there he is, watching and grinning. It's as if he's playing some sinister version of hide and seek, and I'm the reluctant target. I try to focus on my work, but I can feel his eyes on me, as though they're boring holes into my back. Then, out of nowhere, he begins to hum a tune. It's faint, just a whisper under his breath, yet unnervingly disturbing. I can't quite place where I've heard it before, but it's that famously eerie whistling melody. I decide to take a break and head to the lounge, hoping to lose him and grab a few moments of normalcy. My coworker is there, and we're chatting about assignments and exams, trying to keep the atmosphere light. But the whole time, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. And guess what? I was right. I spot him at the entrance to the break room, just standing there, staring directly at me. I freeze, and I swear the room's temperature drops in that instant. I point him out to my coworker, but when he turns around, the guy has vanished. I glance at my coworker, unable to decipher his expression. I ask him if he saw it, but his eyes are filled with confusion. See what? He asks, clearly having seen nothing. I realize then that he missed the entire encounter. It was only me who saw him. I run my fingers through my hair, feeling a blend of paranoia and frustration. Never mind, I mutter, brushing off the subject. Perhaps it's just my imagination running wild. It was late, and I hadn't slept properly in days. My coworker, not as intrigued as I am, remains focused on the task at hand, more interested in completing his work than in exploring whatever nonsense I was dwelling on. We return to our stations, and I'm still shaken. I can't shake the memory of that man's grin. Hours pass, and I struggle to concentrate on my duties, but an underlying unease lingers in the back of my mind. I keep glancing around, half expecting him to reappear with that unnerving grin plastered on his face. Then, out of nowhere, he's back. My heart skips a beat, and my hands tremble. It's like a nightmare materializing before my eyes. He's standing there with that same smirk on his face. My breath catches in my throat, and before I can even react, he's sprinting towards me with quick, determined strides. Panic surges through me, and I'm immobilized. What does he want? My mind races, but my body is frozen. He grabs me, effortlessly lifting me off the ground, shaking me and shouting in my face. Then, as if from afar, I hear a shout. My coworker's voice pierces through the fear. "Hey, what's going on?" he yells, running towards us, his footsteps echoing I. End the aisle. The guy releases his hold on me, his attention shifting to my coworker. In that split second, I find my voice. I scream as loudly as I can and start hitting the guy. My coworker arrives, his presence a reassuring force in the chaos. The man's sudden hesitation spoke volumes as he swiftly turned and fled, vanishing down the aisle. Left behind, I stood trembling, my heart racing. My coworker hurried to my side, his expression one of deep concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. I nodded, though I was utterly breathless from the earlier shouting. Both of us were rattled, struggling to comprehend the chaos that had just erupted. We called the police, and as we awaited their arrival, I couldn't help but replay the encounter in my mind. What was that man's issue? Why did he target me? When the police finally arrived, we recounted the bizarre chain of events. They scoured the area, but the man was already long gone. I detailed what happened, trying to convey just how unsettling and strange he was, mentioning that he had claimed to have done something naughty that night. Suddenly, about 4 more police cars pulled up, indicating they were taking the situation very seriously. My manager decided to send me home for the night and assured me that I didn't need to come in the next day. The following day, I checked the news and learned about a hit-and-run incident nearby, suspected to have been caused by a drunk driver, which resulted in the tragic death of a family of 3. The suspect's description closely matched that of the man who had attacked me. What on earth was this guy's problem? To my knowledge, they never caught him. I still check the news occasionally, hoping for updates, but there's been nothing since. Throughout my life, I've held a few odd jobs. My first was a summer position at 16 during the school break at a dairy farm. I absolutely despised it there, and it made it difficult for me to find the motivation. When the time came for me to consider seeking employment once more, I couldn't quite recall how I first came across the job opportunity. However, by the following summer, I found myself employed as an office assistant for a self-employed photographer. My parents were acquainted with her because she was once a member of their church, and my sister had attended her program when it was active. By then, her health had started to decline, which she attributed to a combination of ailments, including chronic Lyme disease and fibromyalgia. My parents had also cautioned me that she was somewhat eccentric. She was deeply religious and claimed to have had genuine encounters with demons, even participating in exorcisms. Being an atheist and a skeptic, I never gave much credence to her stories. Despite the peculiar tales she shared, she was mostly harmless, and working for her was not particularly difficult. My responsibilities mainly involved a significant amount of data entry and assisting with minor edits to her photographs. She would also have me add her company watermark to the images before uploading them. These photos were then available on a website where her clients could browse through and select the ones they wished to purchase. Her primary focus was on photographing equestrian events, including dressage, stadium jumping, and cross-country jumping, among others. For the first few months, my duties were confined to her living room, which essentially served as my workspace at that time. Eventually, she persuaded me to accompany her to shows, where she trained me in photography. Before long, I was capturing images at these events alongside her. Admittedly, the work was not particularly exciting, as I wasn't particularly interested in horses, but things did continue from there. It didn't start to get unsettling until a year later, when I discovered in a rather difficult way that it was not her I needed to be concerned about. She had 2 sons. One residing out of state and the other serving in the Navy. The latter, named Nathan, was someone I had only heard snippets about. He was reportedly somewhere on the autism spectrum, though she never specified his exact diagnosis. When he finally returned home, I encountered him for the first time while I was working in her living room. He appeared to be a pleasant person, somewhat quirky but not worrisome. He had a fascination with films, and being somewhat of a film enthusiast myself, whenever he ventured into the living room to initiate a conversation, it would almost always revolve around the movies we were into or eager to see. I should mention here that I was 18, while he was in his mid-30s. At some juncture, he got the idea in his head that I was interested in him, though he never directly expressed anything to me. I had to learn about it from my parents. My mom worked as the church secretary, and Nathan somehow discovered this, presumably through my boss. One afternoon, Nathan showed up at my mom's desk and began to effuse about his feelings. He spoke about how much he enjoyed being around me, how he appreciated our conversations, and how he was planning to take me to the movies and introduce me to his church, along with other plans he had concocted for me. My mom was extremely uncomfortable, as was the pastor who happened to overhear the conversation. When I returned home that evening, she recounted what had occurred and advised me to ensure that I did not leave. I was utterly perplexed because I hadn't done anything, and we had never even broached the subject of collaborating on anything. Over the ensuing weeks, I became increasingly uneasy around him. I consciously made an effort to acknowledge him less when he was present and kept our exchanges brief, often emphasizing that I had work to attend to. Eventually, he found his own place and moved out of his parents' home, leading me to believe that the issue had resolved itself. A couple of years later, I had relocated as well. My boss's company had shut down, and I had secured a position elsewhere. I remained friends with both my former boss and Nathan on Facebook. It was around this time that I finally began to openly identify as an atheist, something I couldn't do while I was still living with my family. One evening, my former boss messaged me, inquiring about a ring I wore on my finger. It was a black ring with a white solid star in the center of a black circle. Anticipating her line of questioning, I explained that it was simply a ring. She began accusing me of wearing a pentagram, unaware of what a pentacle was, and accused me of promoting Satanism. Despite my numerous attempts to clarify that the ring was not that symbol and that paganism had no connection to the devil, she refused to listen. Consequently, I chose to ignore her, recognizing it as typical behavior from her and not worth the confrontation. The following morning, I received a message from Nathan insisting that I accompany him to his church. I declined, but his subsequent messages became progressively more hostile. His tone shifted from requesting to demanding. He insisted on accompanying me, claiming I was lost and would never discover the answers I sought by living my current lifestyle. Eventually, he blatantly expressed his disgust at my wearing a pentagram, accusing me of inviting possession. Realizing that arguing with him was even more futile than it had been with his mother, I decided to block both of them, concluding that I was done with the situation entirely. Soon after, he began appearing at my workplace, persistently searching through the store until he found me. Once he did, he would corner me, refusing to stop talking no matter how many times I attempted to evade him or explained that I needed to return to work. Eventually, the managers noticed his behavior and began intercepting him whenever he appeared. I wasn't earning enough to cover the rent with that job, so I had to pick up a second one. Within a week of starting my new job, which was located in a different town, he began showing up there as well. This time, I informed the managers about who he was, and from that point on, whenever he showed up, I was permitted to hide in the back room behind a locked door while they expedited his order to get him out quickly. During one of these encounters, while I was concealed in the back, one of the managers was there with me, entering employee time punches into the computer. We both heard Nathan shout in our direction, "I know you remember me." That was the final straw for them, and they informed him that his business was no longer welcome there. Consequently, he ceased appearing at my other job as well. After some time had passed, fast forward a few years, I had grown accustomed to not having to constantly glance over my shoulder during each shift or scan the parking lot for his truck. Then, one day, he resurfaced. I was walking past a section he was browsing when he noticed me and froze, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. I quickly made my way to the break room because just the sight of him filled me with fear. From that point on, he began to appear regularly. I always found ways to evade him, but he inevitably managed to spot me and realize I was still there. I was torn about whether to inform the managers because, at this point, it had been a long time since he had done anything specific, and speaking up merely because I was anxious seemed unjustified. Call me a coward or a fool, but that was my line of thinking. What transpired next made me regret not speaking up sooner. It was bound to happen sooner or later, but one night he cornered me at the customer service desk. He approached and greeted me with a, "Hi," and I immediately began searching for someone to signal so I could escape. Before I could utter a single word, he said something that turned my stomach. "How's your little girl doing? She's 3, right?" I stared at him, horrified. I had blocked him on all my social media accounts and his number was also blocked. I was living at a new address, and I hadn't seen or spoken to his mother since she confronted me about my ring. I hadn't told either of them that I was now a parent or that I was married, and I wasn't friends with any of our mutual acquaintances. Acquaintance in high school, the type that often went unnoticed in a crowd. Adjusting to the new environment was challenging, but I managed to find a small group of friends who shared my interests. My favorite place was the library, where I could lose myself in books and escape the pressures of adolescence. One day, while browsing the shelves, I noticed a fellow student, someone who seemed equally engrossed in a novel. We exchanged a brief nod of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of our shared love for reading. Over time, we occasionally found ourselves in the same section, and a quiet camaraderie developed between us. As the months passed, I began to notice this student in other parts of the school. He appeared in the cafeteria, at sports events, and even in the hallways between classes, always maintaining a respectful distance but never directly approaching me. It was as if he was orbiting my world, present yet unobtrusive. Then, one afternoon, as I was leaving the library, he approached me with a shy smile and asked about my favorite authors. Our conversation flowed naturally, and I found myself enjoying his company. However, a few days later, I overheard him discussing details about my life that I had never shared with him. It was unsettling, and I realized he had somehow gathered this information without my knowledge. Concerned, I confided in a teacher who assured me they would look into it. Although I never saw him again in school, the experience left a lasting impression on me, a reminder of how easily boundaries can be crossed. I hoped he had simply moved on, finding a healthier way to connect with others. Reflecting on those years, I realize how formative they were. I learned the importance of setting boundaries and trusting my instincts. It was a lesson that would serve me well in the years to come, as I navigated relationships and encountered new challenges in life. A girl who struggled with handling attention from boys often found herself in tricky situations. I had a talent for befriending the quirky individuals whom others tended to avoid, but I made an effort to be amicable with everyone I encountered, so it wasn't a major issue for me. Unfortunately, this openness also became my downfall. Clubs were significant, and they even had an anime club, which naturally piqued my interest. During the first club meeting, I sat beside a couple of friends, fully immersed in the experience. I felt like I had finally found my tribe. Then, in came the stalker kid. I would use his real name, but to this day, I have no idea what it is. He took a seat in front of me, and being the person I am, I greeted him. I could tell he felt uneasy and didn't know anyone, so I was just trying to be kind. Little did I know that one word of kindness would make him latch onto me. Initially, he would locate me during lunch, standing there muttering things to me. He had such a soft, high-pitched voice that it was quite unsettling when he spoke. The way he would gaze at you as he talked made it impossible for me to hold his gaze. Over time, his inquiries turned more towards my personal life and interests. Being naive and somewhat foolish, I attempted to maintain friendly conversations while feeling incredibly uncomfortable. Eventually, my friends and I began moving to different tables and benches, always trying to evade him, but he consistently found me. After about a year of this, my best friend finally declared that if I didn't tell him to back off, he would. I no longer wanted him around, so I agreed. One afternoon during lunch, the notorious stalker kid approached with his signature greeting, barely audible. "Hey, Nancy." My friend immediately retorted, "Dude, she's not interested. Leave her alone." Looking wounded, he shuffled away. I remarked, "You didn't have to be so harsh on him, but thanks." After that incident, I rarely saw him at school, except on club days when he would sit across the room, staring at me while my best friend shot him menacing looks. Fast forward to when I was 16 and driving to school. Without the awkward club days, I didn't notice much from him until an old, gray, beat-up car began parking uncomfortably close to mine. One afternoon after school, he was waiting for me in that car, striking up a conversation about how I'd been, prom, and all sorts of things. I racked my brain trying to figure out how he knew which car was mine unless he had been observing me before and after school. To avoid him, I started arriving later and leaving later, as he was as predictable as clockwork. Eventually, an old friend from elementary school was walking out with me and commented on how that guy was always next to my car, asking if he was my boyfriend. I quickly replied that he wasn't and expressed my frustration about him constantly trailing me, admitting that he was really beginning to scare me. Bless this friend, because he marched right up to him and scared him off, threatening to beat him up if he ever parked near me again. I hoped that would be enough to deter him. Consequently, there was a brief period when I heard nothing about him except from my Friends who had classes with him often mentioned how unsettling he was. One friend, who shared an art class with him, noted that he would frequently sketch images of naked women in his notebooks. As our junior year began to wind down, I started giving my best friend, Jack, a ride to school. He lived along my route, so I thought, why not? Eventually, Jack began to notice that a small gray car seemed to tail us every day after school. He joked about the stalker kid living nearby, remarking on how small the world seemed. We cool. D only wish we were that lucky. One day, the usual gray car was behind us again, so we decided to take an alternative route. Sure enough, the car followed us every step of the way, turning our amusement into genuine concern. We both started to panic. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, determined to lose him and get out of sight as quickly as possible. A few other incidents unfolded during that time. To attend prom, he needed a date, so he asked a random girl from my softball team to accompany him. As soon as he gained entry, he unceremoniously ditched her and spent the entire evening shadowing me. This included following me to the after-prom party, where I had to avoid him the whole time. Our high school had a student-run TV channel that recorded the entire prom night. It took a friend to point it out, but the footage showed him lingering behind me, following and staring at me the entire evening. I hadn't even noticed. The most unnerving memory, which still gives me chills, was during graduation. I was scanning the crowd, looking for my friends who were graduating, when I noticed a hand waving as I walked by. I glanced back, and of course, it was the stalker kid. Reflecting on how he managed to single me out from a crowd of thousands still baffles me. The senior year of 2006 was fantastic, with no trace of that unsettling stalker kid, allowing me to almost forget about him entirely. After graduating, I selected a local college, secured a job at a nearby retail store, and began to move forward with my life, which was becoming quite normal. I worked in the gaming section, which occasionally attracted some peculiar individuals. One frequent visitor was a short Mexican guy with glasses who never bought anything but would wander around occasionally. Then, out of nowhere, the stalker kid sauntered through the doors, headed straight to the gaming section, and just started chatting. I asked him how he knew I worked there, and he mentioned that a friend of his had seen me and knew we were friends. I attempted to radio for assistance to have someone remove him, and eventually, a large guy from the computer department passed by and asked for my help in the back. Once he guided me to safety, I explained everything to him. From that point forward, security was made aware and instructed to keep an eye out for this guy. Since he wasn't doing anything physically threatening, all they could do was watch for him. Each time he appeared, they'd inform me, and I'd retreat to the warehouse. I started noticing his friend, whom he called Ninja, showing up regularly, doing nothing but scrolling through his phone. I began to suspect that he was texting the stalker kid to alert him that I was at work, as sure enough, 10 minutes later, he would arrive. To test this theory, I began wandering randomly around the store. A friend of mine who worked at the register eventually asked why I was doing this, so I had her join me for a walk. During her break, I mentioned to her that this mysterious ninja-like guy seemed to be tailing us everywhere, even if we were just meandering down a random aisle. Sure enough, he did, and she began to panic. A few minutes later, I pointed out that my stalker would likely enter through those doors. As I made my way to the warehouse, out stepped the ninja guy from an aisle, shouting, "She's right here." I just stood there, dumbfounded, thinking, what on earth do you believe you're doing? The stalker kid approached from behind and questioned why I was always running away from him, claiming he had lost my number and asking if I could give it to him once more. I agreed, fully aware that I had never given it to him in the first place. I headed to the warehouse to fetch a pen and paper, scribbling a note that read, "This is where I work. Never come here again," and handed it to him. I instructed him and his friend to leave, then called security, who escorted him out. Security later informed me that he had cried as they d him away. Later that day, as I was leaving work, security offered to accompany me to my car. I agreed, only to find the stalker kid waiting for me by my vehicle. At this point, security declared they wouldn't tolerate this and contacted the police, conveniently located next to their headquarters. As soon as he saw the patrol car, he bolted. A few years passed without incident. I bought a sleek new car, and I didn't see much of him anymore. I thought that had finally done the trick and I was free at last. In 2012, my friends and I were leaving work, eager to enjoy a night out at the bar as usual. We all gathered by the door, waiting for the alarm to sound, signaling that it was armed, as we began to walk. As I heard that dreadful sound, I winced and clutched my friend's arm. Then, there he was, leaning against his car, waiting. My friend recognized him and inquired about his intentions. The guy replied that he just wanted to talk to me, mentioning he hadn't seen my car and assumed I no longer worked there. Meanwhile, his friend sat in the back seat of the car, staring at me with a blank expression. I started imagining the worst-case scenario if my friends left me alone there. A gut feeling told me that I wouldn't be returning to work the following day, wherever I was. I was terrified, remembering how he had years to dwell on our last encounter, where I had written my number down and made him cry. I tightened my grip on my friend's arm. Sensing the tension, my friend pretended to be my boyfriend and launched into a heated confrontation. My friend, towering over him by about 2 feet and significantly larger, engaged in the confrontation while I stood in the parking lot, silently pleading for him to teach the stalker a lesson. The stalker seemed so frightened that I was fairly certain he wet himself before quickly getting into his car and speeding away. Ever since then, whenever he entered the store, my friend would glare at him from his office. Years later, I had moved on, gotten married, and relocated out of town. Recently, we returned to start a business, and to this day, I still find myself glancing over my shoulder in stores, just in case I might unexpectedly run into him. He left me with anxiety, emotional distress, fear, and trust issues that lingered for a decade. Even after moving on, I continue to feel the repercussions today, and I never even knew his name. I'll begin by providing a bit of background. At the time, when I was a 16-year-old high school student, I worked at a coffee chain. Now, at 19, I find myself in college, 7 hours away from that job. Reflecting on that period of my life, I realize I was extremely shy and struggled to assert myself. In hindsight, I could have managed certain situations better. My best friend and I would close the store together after school. From around 3 o'clock to 10 p.m. the store wasn't particularly busy, allowing us the freedom to play music and chat while completing our tasks, such as taking out the trash and restocking supplies. We both dreaded taking the trash out because it involved going to the dumpsters located behind the store, in a poorly lit area next to a dubious liquor store. One evening, quite late, a man came in. Although having customers near closing time wasn't unusual, it was rare to see someone we didn't already know since the store mostly served regulars. The man was slender and appeared to be around 30 years old. What stood out to me most were his eyes. They were intense and seemed to never break their gaze. Initially, I found him attractive, which, in retrospect, makes me cringe. He spoke in a brief and direct manner, ordering just a small hot latte. I prepared his drink, and that was the end of our interaction. Later, I shared with my friend that I thought he was attractive, and we began referring to him as the small hot latte guy, as we often nicknamed people by their drink orders. He returned several times afterward, each visit lasting a tea longer and involving a bit more conversation. On one occasion, he arrived with a woman, presumably. I recall feeling somewhat uneasy when I first met him and his girlfriend, as it seemed she was staring at me, almost as if they had discussed me before. She glanced at him and remarked, "Wow, she is pretty." I didn't dwell on it, simply thanked her, served them, and assumed that would be the conclusion of our interaction. However, he soon began visiting frequently and engaging in conversation with me without her presence. Initially, he was just friendly, and I honestly can't recall what we discussed. Eventually, he became somewhat flirtatious. At first, I was merely flattered, but being young and naive, I didn't recognize how unsettling it was. He started lingering around for extended periods, occasionally bringing a laptop or notebook. I sensed him watching me and listening in on our conversations, yet at that stage, he didn't give off any creepy vibes. My coworker and I had encountered our fair share of unsettling individuals. He began by offering small snacks or drinks, which I accepted but never consumed. It wasn't that I suspected him of having bad intentions, I simply found it difficult to accept gifts. I remember one evening when he brought me a book about one of his favorite artists. I took it hesitantly, having tried to refuse it at first. I also recalled telling him about one of my favorite musicians and sending him a link to a performance I adored. His behavior shifted to being somewhat sexual while discussing the song. He started speaking in an overtly suggestive manner, and I would laugh it off, declining his requests for pictures. Gradually, I spoke to him less and less and confided in my friend about the situation. Upon reflection, she concurred that the situation was becoming increasingly unsettling and suggested I might want to adjust my schedule. I insisted I would be alright, being quite obstinate. Nevertheless, he would still show up every week at closing time, lingering in his car until we closed, watching me go to the back to dispose of the trash. The time came to take out the trash and lock up, so we readied ourselves. As I opened the door, juggling 3 bags of garbage, I noticed something on the ground. Initially bewildered, I soon realized what it was: flowers and a note. A wave of nausea hit me as I scanned the parking lot, but his car was nowhere in sight. I discarded the items immediately and informed my friend that I had no desire to read the note. She did so and insisted that I must read it. The note expressed sentiments along the lines of, "I've never felt so connected to someone. You're breaking my heart. Please, don't do this. I'm sorry." In hindsight, I genuinely did not lead him on, yet initially, I felt as if I had done something wrong. Regardless, we rounded the corner to dispose of the trash, both hoping the parking lot would be empty. It was not. Suffice it to say, the trash would remain untended that night. I continued working there and even returned during college breaks, though my hours had changed. For a while, nothing occurred until one day, just before I was set to leave for college, he appeared again. It was around 3 p.m., during a busy time. He entered, stared at me, and then departed. That was the final time I saw him. In retrospect, I realize how naive I was and that I could have managed the situation far more effectively. I am eternally grateful to my friend who truly supported me during that period. A year ago, I would share every aspect of my life on Snapchat. It was my go-to app for connecting with friends and family by sharing glimpses of my daily experiences. However, an incident occurred that made me reevaluate my digital presence. One day, seemingly out of nowhere, I received a friend request from a username I didn't recognize. I didn't give it much thought at the time and accepted the request without hesitation, assuming it was just another random individual. As months went by, that peculiar request slipped from my memory. Life continued, and I kept posting snapshots of my everyday activities on Snapchat, unaware that someone was watching intently. It began innocuously with an unexpected snap. I opened it, thinking it was probably a friend sharing a funny meme or a cute photo. But as the image loaded, my heart nearly stopped. It was a creepy, edited version of an old Snapchat story I had posted months earlier. Floating hearts surrounded the image, and the caption read, "Can't wait to see you." Ignoring the chill running down my spine was impossible. How had someone accessed my old stories? Who was behind this? Days turned into weeks, and more edited snaps kept arriving. Each one featured images taken from my past stories, with captions that became increasingly disturbing, referencing my personal life. "How was your McDonald's on Friday?" one read, and another said, "I love that movie you watched last night." The feeling of being watched was suffocating. I felt exposed and vulnerable, as though an unfamiliar presence had intruded upon my personal space. It wasn't long before I decided to consult Snap Maps, the feature that reveals the real-time locations of your friends. My heart raced as I focused on the map. There it was, uncomfortably close, the location of this unsettling individual. He was nearby, and the thought sent chills coursing through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a harmless prank or an instance of trolling. It felt deeply personal, as if someone was toying with my mind. Anxiety gripped me as I realized this enigmatic friend was drawing nearer to my location. I knew I needed to act swiftly. I began capturing screenshots of the disturbing snaps to gather evidence. Then, I contacted the local authorities and reported the distressing situation. The ensuing investigation revealed the identity of the intruder. To my astonishment, it turned out to be someone I had met at a party several months ago. I had been warned about how unsettling and odd he was. He would simply invite himself to gatherings, and no one wanted to be impolite by asking him to leave, so we merely put up with him. To be fair, I hadn't had any issues with him and chatted with him briefly throughout the evening, but I didn't see much of him afterward. I suppose my kindness towards the social outcast, while others kept him at a distance, was enough for him to become fixated on me. Ultimately, they didn't press charges against him, but they instructed him to stay away from me and explained that I could pursue a restraining order if necessary. However, I didn't see the point. This incident took place a couple of months ago, in December of last year. I then began working. Having recently secured a job at the mall, I found myself working throughout most of Boxing Day. My shift concluded at 10 p.m., and I realized that public transportation had ceased operations by 7 p.m. As a student who remained in town for work over the holidays, I was unfamiliar with the holiday transit schedules. Consequently, I opted to call an Uber. The driver arrived promptly at the mall's entrance, and we engaged in light conversation during the ride. Through our chat, he discovered where I worked and learned that I was living alone temporarily while my roommates were visiting their hometowns. The following day at work, around 6 p.m., the same driver unexpectedly entered the store and attempted to initiate a conversation with me. I politely informed him that I needed to return to my duties. He then asked if we could spend time together later, to which I firmly declined, and he subsequently left. At the conclusion of my shift, I exited the store with the intention of using public transportation. As soon as I stepped outside, the driver pulled up beside me, offering a complimentary ride home. Despite his insistence and my repeated refusals, I ultimately chose to walk away and catch a bus instead. As quite unsettled by the fact that he had appeared at my workplace and waited for 3 hours until my shift ended to propose a ride home. I reported the incident to Uber, who informed me that they had suspended the driver, issued me a full refund, and provided a link for filing a report with the police, should I choose to do so. In hindsight, it was unwise to share personal information with a stranger, and I sincerely hope to never encounter that driver again. He was about twice my age and knew both where I lived and my name. Lesson learned. To begin with, I have always loved driving, embarking on long, meandering journeys to nowhere in particular, with no set destination. Just me, my music, and the open road ahead. Living in Nebraska, I frequently ventured onto back roads or desolate highways, slicing through the countryside to reach small towns and, eventually, larger cities. These excursions typically occurred at night, when the roads were blessedly free of heavy traffic. Since obtaining my driver's license 5 years ago, I've indulged in these drives and have never encountered any problems or faced any trouble. That is, until a few nights ago. For context, I am a relatively petite 22-year-old woman. As I mentioned, I often embark on these solitary drives. They serve as an excellent way to clear my mind when I'm feeling stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or to strategize and solve personal dilemmas. In the past, I also used these long, solitary drives to escape the toxicity of my home life. When I lived with my parents, it was a way to cope with their alcoholism. Now that I've moved out and am in a much healthier mental space, I no longer feel the need to hop in my car and drive aimlessly. However, on the night in question, I was feeling exceptionally overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious due to a tangle of personal issues I prefer not to delve into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, unable to concentrate on anything else. So, I decided to take a drive to clear my mind. My boyfriend, he was understanding and advised me to be cautious, reminding me not to stay out too late since the hour was growing quite late. I agreed, gave him a farewell kiss, and departed. I drove around our city for approximately 30 minutes, but my mind was still uneasy with everything unfolding in my personal life. So, I chose to drive further north along the familiar dark, winding, single-lane highways. I maintained a steady speed of 65 miles per hour, taking the curves more slowly in case a deer might leap out from around a bend. As I continued driving, I found myself admiring the vast, empty darkness of the snow-covered fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit eerie to be entirely alone with no cars in sight, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. The few houses miles back from the road were devoid of light, and the dead cornfields had withered away, now entirely blanketed by snow. It was like something out of a horror film, and I half expected to see a ghost appear in my rearview mirror or witness someone emerge from the patches of trees silhouetting the horizon. The only illumination came from my headlights, and even then, I strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By this time, it was just after 11 o'clock, and I reminded myself that once I reached the familiar roundabout, which could lead either to a small town or back towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still perhaps 15 to 25 minutes away, but aside from my imagination conjuring the worst scenarios, I wasn't particularly worried. After all, I was on my own, without any other mo. As I navigated a curve in the road, my attention was drawn to a car with its hazard lights blinking, positioned roughly a quarter of a mile ahead. It was a dark sedan, partially on the shoulder, but the rest of it jutted out onto the road, as if it had pulled over hastily but failed to do so completely. The driver's side door stood wide open, and as I reduced my speed and steered toward the opposite lane to pass by, I noticed what appeared to be blood smeared on the inside of the open door. No one was visible on the road or inside the car, and I was the sole traveler in sight in this desolate part of the countryside. In this region, cell phone reception is notoriously unreliable, often vanishing entirely despite one's fervent hopes for a signal. This was precisely the situation when I glanced at my phone, only to confirm the absence of service. Here I was, a lone woman on a rural road at night, approaching an abandoned vehicle that bore signs of a potential attack inside, and with no cell service to speak of. I'm not naive. I've watched countless episodes of crime documentaries and series like Criminal Minds and devoured numerous true crime books. These sources taught me to recognize a dangerous situation when I see one, and this scenario screamed danger at every turn. Yet, a small part of me was concerned that something dreadful had befallen whoever had been in the car, and I felt compelled to provide assistance. These roads are scarcely traveled at night, and the temperatures were plummeting well below freezing. If someone was in trouble, they would need help soon. If someone were injured or in distress, there was no one and nothing else to assist them. Nevertheless, I erred on the side of caution. I continued driving my car, albeit at a more leisurely pace. As I neared the vehicle, I slightly rolled down the passenger window, turned off the music, and called out, "Hey, is anyone there? Are you okay?" There was no response, which made me worry they might have passed out somewhere. Still, I wasn't prepared to get out and search for them. I decided I would call out once more, and if I didn't receive a reply, I would leave. As soon as I got reception, I would report the situation. If I did hear someone, I would determine my next steps then. So, I shouted once more, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, I heard rustling in the shadowy trees, followed by a gruff voice responding to me. Initially, I felt relieved and was about to say something in return or possibly even stop my car and get out when I noticed three things almost simultaneously. As I carefully edged past the front of the sedan, I observed there was no damage to the hood or any part of the vehicle, which seemed odd given the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught sight of someone emerging from behind the sedan, quickly making their way toward my car. The person approaching didn't have any blood on them, nor did they appear injured in the slightest. They were wearing a mask, not a face mask like for COVID-19, a ski mask, or anything typical, but one of those masks you'd see in TV. The Purge movies came to mind as they clutched something in their hand. I couldn't quite discern what it was, but based on its length and shape, I suspected it might be a tire iron, a crowbar, or something similar. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I floored the gas pedal the moment I noticed these things, driving like a bat out of hell, my heart pounding in my chest and my entire body trembling. My window was still rolled down in my rush, and the music was turned off, so I could clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me. Although I had no idea what he was yelling, I knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last glance in my rearview mirror as I sped away, primarily to check if they were getting into their sedan to chase me or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon stood in the middle of the road, watching me, and just before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees they had been wrestling with earlier. He, too, wore one of those eerie masks, with no sign of blood on him. I likely violated every speed limit that night, but I was desperate to distance myself from those men. Once I reached the roundabout, I headed towards town and parked in the Walmart parking lot, which thankfully still had cars belonging to workers closing up shop. There, I broke down completely. Once I managed to pull myself together, I called my friend Troy, who is a police officer, to explain what had happened. He was concerned for my well-being. He asked if I was alright, inquired about my location, and whether they had followed me. He explained that since the incident occurred beyond the city limits, there was little he could do personally, but he offered to contact the local police or sheriff in the area to take my statement and investigate the situation. I agreed, expressed my gratitude, and while awaiting the arrival of law enforcement, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs, I managed to convey what had transpired nearly 10 minutes earlier. Understandably, he was extremely worried about my safety and insisted that I either return home immediately or that he would come to pick me up. I explained that the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave, but reassured him that I was safe. I remained on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the parking lot. I provided my statement to the officers, and they assured me they would return to the location to investigate and attempt to apprehend the individuals responsible. However, without any surveillance footage or a description of the men, I doubted their chances of success. In my panic, I hadn't thought to note the license plate number, a detail that only occurred to me when the officers asked if I had it. All they had to go on was a dark-colored sedan and 2 masked men. After giving my statement, I went home and stayed curled up next to my boyfriend the entire night, anxiously listening to every sound the house made, fearing that those men might arrive at any moment to finish whatever they had started. Since the incident, I haven't heard anything further. I've yet to hear back from the police about whether they have any leads, and I'm uncertain if they ever will. I'm just grateful to still be here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I can't imagine what might have happened to me if I had. So many questions remain unanswered. What were they up to? Was that really blood on the inside of the car, or just a ploy to attract more attention? If it was truly blood, did they harm someone else? What might have occurred if I had halted my car? Needless to say, I won't be taking any more late-night drives, and I hope never to encounter those odd individuals again. If you're enjoying the video so far, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It all began with an ordinary day at work. At the time, I was employed at a small grocery store, and my duties involved collecting shopping carts in the parking lot and bagging groceries, the typical minimum wage tasks. It was raining that morning, and of course, I was assigned to cart duty. About 2 hours into my shift, I noticed a man hurriedly loading his groceries into his car. I dashed over to assist him with his bags. "Mind if I help you get out of the rain?" I offered. "Yes, thank you so much," he replied. As he closed his trunk, he glanced at me with a surprised expression. He raised his eyebrows, gave me a once-over from head to toe, and smirked. "Are you a new hire?" he inquired. "No, I've been here for a couple of months," I responded. "Oh, you are very pretty," he remarked in an oddly suggestive tone. "Thank you, have a good day," I said, shutting down the conversation, as I wasn't interested. As I made my way back to the store to hide until he departed, I could feel his gaze fixed on me as I walked away. Nevertheless, I continued with my work, not dwelling on it much after my lunch break. While I was at the register, bagging groceries, I noticed that the same man from earlier had entered the store again. I pretended not to notice him and continued bagging items. He approached the register and purchased a single chocolate bar. I didn't provide him with a bag. He loomed over me and asked, "Are you going to bag my item?" I replied, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you wanted a bag for just one item." I placed his chocolate bar in a bag and wished him a good day. "When are you off work, sweetheart?" he asked. Uncomfortable, I responded, "I'm not comfortable giving out that information." He replied, "That's okay, you've been here 5 hours? You probably get off around 7, right?" He smiled, winked at me, and walked away. Feeling uneasy, I went to my manager and explained what had happened. She advised me not to work outside anymore and to ask someone to accompany me to my car. By the end of my shift, a male coworker walked me to my truck, and we scanned the parking lot for the man's vehicle. We didn't spot him, so my coworker went back inside while I started my truck. I called my mom to inform her about the situation, and as soon as she answered, I left the parking lot. Just as I turned onto the road, I noticed his car pulling onto the road behind me. I told my mom I thought he was following me, and she advised me to drive around to try to lose him. I spent about 20 minutes driving in circles around my town. I encountered a red light, and he pulled up beside me, shouting something through his open window. Naturally, I acted as if he wasn't there, yet I could clearly hear his words. "You'd be some good kids for me. You'd make a great slave for me, little lady," he taunted, then proceeded to make very explicit threats about what he intended to do if he caught me. I informed my mom that I was planning to call 911 and instructed her to contact the police if I wasn't home within an hour. As I attempted to reach the authorities, the man accelerated past my truck and began brake-checking me. In a state of panic, I waited for the nearest intersection and turned onto a side street. During the turn, my phone slipped under the seat, so I decided to head to the closest open establishment to seek refuge and have someone else call for assistance. The nearest open business I spotted was a convenience store at a gas station. I pulled in, parked hurriedly, and dashed inside for safety. I explained the situation to the clerk, who led me to the break room and locked me inside. While processing the reality that I might have escaped this terrifying encounter, I heard the storefront doors being violently rattled. Before I realized it, the clerk joined me in the break room, locking the door behind her. She was on the phone with the police, who were on their way. We remained silent, huddled in the darkened room, and I felt a pang of guilt for involving another woman in such a dreadful situation. My mind raced with questions. Had I somehow encouraged him? All I had done was wish him a good day. How long had he been following me? How did he know which car I drive? Will the police arrive in time, or are we doomed? At last, the small room was filled with the flashing red and blue lights visible through the crack beneath the door. A voice over the intercom assured us it was safe to emerge. With trembling hands, the clerk retrieved our keys and unlocked the door. We stepped out, provided our statements, and after the police departed, I turned to my unexpected savior, expressing my gratitude profusely. We cried, embraced, and she accompanied me to my car. The following night, I returned, bringing her some food and an Amazon gift card. I had once been in a near-fatal car accident, just 10 feet from a mountain lion in the wilderness, but I can honestly say I thought that moment marked the end of my life. Thank you for reading. Stay vigilant, exercise caution, and remain safe. This encounter transpired a little over 10 years ago, when I was about 26. I can't recall the exact year, but it was somewhere around 2012. During that period, I frequently went out with friends to bars and parties, often staying out quite late on most weekends. The friend's house I usually visited was situated on a side street just off a main road, lined with popular and bustling bars and restaurants. Parking was on the street at his house, and on busy weekends, it was common to park several blocks away. The street closer to the bars was pleasant, but venturing a few blocks in the opposite direction, the area became somewhat sketchy. After a night out, I found myself needing to walk back to my car late in the evening. It was parked several blocks away in a slightly less safe area. This was during the winter, so I had on a thick sweater or pullover along with a beanie. This detail matters only because, in the dim light, it would have been difficult to discern much about my appearance from a distance, aside from my general height and physique. The area was fairly deserted, being far from the bustling bars, and the streets were shrouded in darkness without streetlights. As I strolled along the pavement, a car began to slowly tail me, matching my pace until it drew level and came to a halt. The window of the vehicle rolled down, revealing a young woman at the wheel. She was quite attractive and commented that I appeared cold, offering to give me a lift to my destination. She exuded friendliness, but I explained that my car wasn't far, thanked her for the offer, and decided to continue walking. She persisted, trying hard to persuade me to accept her offer since the night was so chilly. There was no small talk to gather any information about me or to ensure I wasn't a threat. She simply insisted I get into the car, rather assertively. Given the darkness and my attire, it was unlikely she could discern much about my appearance that could have sparked her interest. Even if she had, I don't know many women who would pick up a male stranger after midnight while they're alone in their car. In their vicinity, there were approximately 10 bars she could have visited if her goal was simply to meet someone. I couldn't fathom any reason why she would resort to driving around, offering rides to strangers. As she continued to drive alongside me, she extended the offer once more, which I declined, maintaining my pace. Eventually, she drove off. Once she was a few blocks away, I hurried to my car, ensuring no one was lurking nearby. The entire situation seemed odd and senseless to me. Later, I discussed it with my friends, and all the women agreed that they wouldn't offer a ride to a random man, especially at night, even if he resembled Ryan Gosling or Channing Tatum. I suspected there might have been someone hiding in the backseat, possibly armed, waiting to rob anyone who accepted the ride. I couldn't comprehend any plausible reason for her to be offering rides to complete strangers in the dead of night, as it would be extremely risky for her. I just assumed there had to be something sinister happening in that car and often wondered what might have occurred if someone had actually accepted her offer. I hope you're finding the story engaging so far. Thank you for supporting the channel. When I was 18 years old, I was house-sitting with a girl I was studying with. The family we were house-sitting for attended the same church as her, but I didn't really know them. I was doing well myself, primarily keeping her company in that enormous house. This was back in 1997, a time when an average teenager like me didn't own a cell phone. That week coincided with a brief pause in the school calendar, which explained why the family was away and why the neighborhood streets were more tranquil than usual. My apartment, as well as the house we were looking after, wasn't far from the university. In fact, my apartment was a mere 3-minute walk from it, and the house was an additional 5-minute drive. Being a student area, it was especially quiet that week. The first peculiar incident that occurred during my stay at the house was a dream. In it, I found myself driving through a shadowy forest along a steep, unpaved road. The only illumination came from my car's headlights. As I began descending a hill, the headlights abruptly went out, plunging everything into darkness. The car gradually came to a halt and stopped running. When I woke up the next morning, I went out to my car and discovered it wouldn't start. It had been functioning perfectly the previous day. I had to call someone to repair it, and it turned out to be the starter motor. That was the first unsettling event of that week. About a day later, on Friday, I intended to drive back to my parents' home, which was located in a smaller town approximately 45 minutes away. I packed my belongings at the large house and was planning to stop by my apartment to gather the rest of the items I needed for the weekend. As I mentioned earlier, the journey between the house and the apartment was only about a 5-minute drive. Since it was winter, it was already dark by the time I left around. At 7 p.m., as I was driving away from my house, I noticed in my rearview mirror the headlights of a car following me unusually closely. Every time I turned, it mirrored my movements. I became alert, but not excessively so, just enough to realize that something strange was happening behind me. Then, when I stopped at a traffic light, the car mysteriously disappeared, offering me a brief moment of relief. However, that relief was short-lived as the car reappeared, now alongside me. I glanced to my right and saw a man inside, alone, grinning at me with a wild look in his eyes. For a fleeting second, I thought, wow, maybe I should wear a beanie at night so people can't see that I'm a petite 5 feet 2 inches woman with long blonde hair reaching down to my waist. I also considered that since he was in the lane to turn right, I was probably safe. I continued driving, but soon enough, the headlights were tailing me once more. What an idiot, I thought. Who drives like that? Fortunately, my upcoming left turn was approaching quickly. After enduring another minute or two of his aggressive tailgating, I slowed down deliberately, refrained from signaling, and executed a sudden sharp left into my driveway. I activated the automatic gates and swiftly drove inside. As the gates closed behind me, I exhaled deeply, thinking the ordeal had finally ended. I gathered a few belongings from the car to bring with me and, while heading towards the stairwell, noticed a man at the gate that had just closed behind me. He remained on the other side, and although I was at the far end of the parking lot, I could clearly identify him as the guy from the tailgating car. He was jumping up and down, shaking the gate with fervor. I was engulfed in a sense of acute anger, but I was safely on this side and not completely paralyzed by fear. Nearby, a group of students were creating a ruckus, likely gathering for some kind of celebration or event. I made my way to the staircase, ascending from the ground level to the first floor. As I rounded the stairs on the first floor, I noticed an individual sprinting across the parking lot, heading toward the staircase. Looking back, I still can't comprehend why I didn't immediately grasp the situation. Perhaps it was because I was subconsciously aware of the group being herded through the pedestrian gate as I rounded the staircase between the second and third floors. Suddenly, someone touched me. I spun around to see a guy who had blended in with the small crowd. He said something, and I retorted with a sarcastic remark, telling him to back off. I turned my back on him to continue my ascent to the third floor, where I lived. Unexpectedly, he seized me from behind, pressing my back against his chest, his left arm wrapped around my neck. I felt something pressing against my right side, a knife. He ushered me down, and I recalled thinking about how the light on the bottom level was broken. This situation couldn't possibly end well, yet I remained oddly composed. I offered some resistance, but he tightened his hold. I began to feel short of breath, as if I wasn't getting enough air, and started to become limp. As I grew weaker, I managed to elbow him. The blow landed, and he released me, spinning around to confront me. In the struggle, he tore the front of my button-down shirt. Then, he froze, his gaze shifting to someone behind me. This person was taller than him, and his eyes widened in shock. He spun around and took off running. I screamed, and then I also turned to see who had come to our aid. To my surprise, there was no one there. although neighbors soon emerged from their apartments. The police were summoned, marking their second visit that night. It turned out that another strange occurrence had already unfolded. My father had contacted the police, and they had arrived about an hour earlier. My mother had felt uneasy all evening, persistently warning my father that something terrible was going to happen to me. Her intuition was, unfortunately, correct. They eventually apprehended him, and I identified him in a lineup. He was a serial offender in the vicinity, accused of attacking around 14 women. One victim had even leapt from her first-floor apartment in a desperate attempt to escape, resulting in a broken leg. Weeks later, before his trial, the police informed me that his cell door had been left open, and he had vanished. It seemed to be an inside job. I've experienced several eerie incidents in my life, but this one still haunts me, reminding me of how swiftly things could have spiraled out of control. At the time, I was a 20-year-old woman living in a very isolated part of southern Indiana. This story unfolded during a weekend night when my best friend and I were returning home from our graveyard shift at a local waffle diner. She decided to pick up her dog from her house so we could spend the night at my place, a detail that would prove significant later. We began our journey into the secluded countryside where I lived. To reach my home, we had to traverse a long, narrow dirt road about a mile long. About a mile into our journey, we noticed the glow of a truck's headlights. As we drew nearer, it became clear that it was a well-maintained truck, likely from around 2018. I'll admit, I'm not an expert on vehicles, so bear with me. The truck was parked at an angle, obstructing the entire path. Puzzled, I stepped out of the car and inquired if the driver was all right. Initially, he seemed relieved to see me and explained, "I'm just waiting for a friend to come and get me. My truck's stuck." He smiled, but I couldn't help but notice that his pupils were almost fully dilated. He glanced back at my car, saw that I wasn't alone, and noticed the dog poking its head out of the window. His smile quickly vanished as he commented, "Pit bulls are mean and nasty." With that, he turned away and returned to his truck. I went back to my friend and said, "Put this in reverse and use all the driving skills you've got to get us out of here." We reversed my poor 95 Cavi, which really shouldn't have been navigating a dirt road, and made our way back to the main road. Feeling relieved, we decided to take a different route home. To our astonishment, the same man was parked on that road too, standing to the side, smiling and staring into our headlights. On the verge of panic, we floored the gas pedal and sped the rest of the way home. I have no idea how he managed to get there before us or what his intentions were, but I'm grateful I wasn't alone. At the time, being a fairly naive college girl, I was thankful for the pit bull's presence, which probably protected us from that man. Ironically, a few months later, the dog unexpectedly snapped at my friend. The incident had resulted in severe injuries for her. The dog had been well behaved its entire life, and I know she was a responsible owner. I suppose it must have been an instinctual reaction with pit bulls. They can suddenly become aggressive at any t. Me. Please feel free to leave a like and a comment if you haven't done so already. What was your favorite story? A few years back, I was renting a house in Northern California. The community was located just beyond the suburbs, striking the perfect balance between having personal space and having friendly neighbors nearby, so I never felt secluded. The area lacked streetlights, making it extremely dark at night, especially when clouds obscured the moonlight. However, I didn't mind. It made my cozy house feel even more quaint on those pitch-black nights. One evening in midwinter, I returned home from work. It was a cloudy night, and as I pulled into my driveway, the only light came from my car's headlights and the front porch light. As I stepped out of my car, I caught the scent of cigarette smoke, which was unusual since I had never noticed it around the house before. Seeing no one nearby, I dismissed it and went inside. I had just completed a shift with several hours of overtime, so I was quite exhausted, despite it not even being 7 o'clock yet. I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I awoke sometime later, certain I had heard a noise inside my house. Initially, I wasn't concerned because my friend occasionally stopped by to use my shower after work on his way to night classes. I had even given him a spare key, so he could drop by even if I wasn't home. He would usually send me a text to let me know beforehand. Although I hadn't heard my phone ring, I instinctively reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to check if my friend had sent any messages. The bright light from the screen momentarily blinded me. Those were the days before phones had light sensors to dim the screen in the dark. This particular phone was so bright it could double as a flashlight. Squinting, I could barely make out that it was a little past 9, but I couldn't tell if any texts were unread. Setting the phone aside, I called out my friend's name. A few seconds of silence followed before the sound of loud footsteps echoed as someone began to run through the lower floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and dashed to the closet. By the time I opened the closet door and stepped inside, they were already climbing the stairs. The house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in, a spare, and a bathroom at the end. Both bedroom doors were closed, but the bathroom door was slightly ajar. I heard the intruder thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thankfully, this gave me just enough time to open the attic access panel in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had barely started lifting myself into the attic when they ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were just inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps enter my room and stop, likely confused by my absence. They then rushed back into the hallway and into the other room. In the dimly lit attic, I crouched near the access point, just a foot or so away, poised to intervene if necessary. Below, the intruders rummaged through my room. They seemed to have assumed that if anyone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom. They had stormed back into the room, flicking on the light, and moments later, I heard the closet door being yanked open. From my vantage point, I could only see from their knees downward. They were clad in grimy blue jeans with frayed hems and sturdy work boots. After a brief inspection of the closet, they retreated, and I was startled by the sound of something crashing down, followed by a scream of frustration and fury. That scream was the most unsettling aspect of the ordeal for me. It bore an unsettling resemblance to the outbursts of my stepfather, who would yell in a similar manner whenever he lost his temper. His unpredictable and violent behavior eventually resulted in his admission to a mental health facility for various disorders. The intruder then bolted due the stairs, causing a cacophony of crashes and clatters as objects were hurled and furniture was overturned. I remained huddled in the attic, having left my cell phone behind in my haste to hide in the closet. I wasn't certain I could descend without alerting him to my presence. After a period of tense silence, the commotion subsided. I began to count slowly, and upon reaching 1,000, I deemed it safe enough to climb down and contact the authorities. As I emerged from the closet, the first thing I noticed was that the intruder had upended my bed. I presumed the loud noise I heard after he stepped away from the closet was an attempt to locate me. Unable to find my cell phone, I turned to the landline beside the bed and dialed the police. I remained in my room until their voices echoed from downstairs. The first floor was in disarray, just as I had anticipated. Chairs were overturned, the sofa was upended, and all the books, pictures, and knickknacks that once adorned my shelves were scattered across the floor. The kitchen cupboards had been flung open, with all the boxed and canned goods strewn about. As far as I could tell, the sole missing item was a single knife from the wooden block in my kitchen. The police conducted a thorough search of the house, discovering that the side door had been forcibly opened, likely with a crowbar. They also found several cigarette butts along my fence line, accompanied by some foil and an empty pan, which they explained were often used by people to smoke meth. This led them to believe he had been surveilling my house for some time. I realized he must have been outside smoking a cigarette when I arrived home. After collecting the evidence, the police advised me to stay with family or friends that night and to get the door repaired as soon as possible. I decided to forego sleep, instead moving a shelf to barricade the broken door and spending the next few hours tidying up. Frequently, I would go to the window with a flashlight, casting its beam along the fence line where the police had discovered the cigarette butts and foil, but I saw nothing. The following day, I arranged for the door to be repaired and had motion sensor lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a telephone line up into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to find myself up there without a phone again. Despite these precautions, nothing else occurred at that house. I lived there for another 3 years without any incidents. As an additional measure, I practiced getting out of bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even continued this practice at my new residence, although now I head to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to dwell on what might have happened if I had been slightly slower in reaching the attic or if he hadn't first entered the bathroom at the end of the hallway. If you're enjoying the video, Please gently click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. My roommate was away for the week, so I had the place to myself. It was spring break, so my college classes were on hold. I had no plans and nothing I needed to do on Monday. Essentially trapped indoors due to a massive storm sweeping through our city, which was typical for this time of year, it always seemed worse with each occurrence. The trees constantly appeared as if they would be torn from the ground, and the house would shake and creak incessantly. Knowing I wouldn't be able to sleep, I decided to stay up. I turned on the Xbox, launched one of my video games, and played for over an hour, probably until around 11 o'clock, when the doorbell rang. As the doorbell rang, I paused my game and stood up, suddenly recalling the storm raging outside. Who could possibly be out there right now? I approached the front door and peered through the peephole, only to find nothing. Opening the door, I was immediately assailed by wind and rain, yet saw no one around. I shut the door, musing that perhaps the wind had somehow triggered the doorbell. It seemed foolish now, but what else was I to think? Returning to my game, it wasn't long before a loud crash echoed from the backyard, followed by the sound of items toppling and breaking. I instantly realized it was our patio furniture and dashed to the back door. The yard was a chaotic scene, with everything strewn about, swirling in the fierce wind. Hastily, I slipped on my shoes and went outside, pushing each piece of furniture against the back of the house. The wind was so strong it stung whenever the rain struck my face. I hurried, moving as quickly as possible, until I noticed someone standing at the edge of the backyard, observing me. I glanced at them briefly, then grabbed the final piece of furniture and rushed inside to escape the rain. As I dried off, I glanced at the back door, but the person had vanished. Between that and the doorbell ringing, I felt a bit uneasy. I settled in the living room, scrolling through my phone, tired of the constant interruptions. After a while, I struggled to keep my eyes open. Grabbing a blanket, I lay down on the couch, not wanting to venture upstairs as the storm continued outside. The noise from above grew significantly louder, and although it took some time, I eventually drifted into sleep. A few hours later, while it was still deep into the night, I was abruptly awakened by a fierce gust of wind shaking the house. Pulling the blanket aside, I sat up and swung my feet to the floor, getting ready to check if the outdoor furniture had remained in place. However, the moment my feet made contact with the floor, they were met with a cold, wet sensation that jolted me fully awake. Looking down, I noticed a puddle right next to the couch, and another forming a trail across the floor. Within these puddles were faint imprints of money-patterned shoe prints. Startled, I sprang up and dashed to the corner of the room, my heart pounding fiercely in my chest. After a tense minute filled only with the sound of the wind outside, I cautiously began to trace the path of the shoe prints. They meandered throughout the house, both upstairs and downstairs, but it was evident they had entered through the back door, which I had foolishly left unlocked in my haste to escape the rain. I quickly locked the door and reached for my phone to dial 911, but a chilling thought struck me. What if the intruder was still inside? I remained silent, retreating to the most concealed corner of the house. I waited quietly for the authorities to arrive. When they did, they surveyed the scene, observing everything I had seen, yet nothing more. They concluded that it appeared to be a personal attack, as nothing was missing and the focus seemed squarely on my house. Strangely enough, the intruder had approached me while I slept, seemingly doing nothing but watching me, which is. The situation was unsettling and eerie, but it didn't quite add up. If they had intended to harm me, they would have acted right then and there. After mulling it over, I came to the conclusion that whoever it was must have been connected to my roommates. They saw me, inspected the entire house, and left without doing anything at all. If this had been a targeted attack and my roommate was present, I suspect things could have turned out far worse than they did. I had been living with my older brother for approximately 4 years after completing school. We split the rent for an apartment since neither of us could shoulder the cost alone. However, during our 4th year, my brother began earning a better salary and planned to move out once our lease expired. I wasn't earning much, so I knew I couldn't afford the place by myself. I browsed online for a roommate over several months but eventually decided it would be best for me to move out too and seek a more affordable option. I continued my search until the final month of our lease. By then, my brother had mostly moved out, and I was under significant pressure to find a new home quickly. Given my very limited budget, this was quite challenging. Eventually, I happened upon a listing from a homeowner offering a room for rent. The owner's name was Evan. I texted him to express my interest and then continued my search. He replied within a few minutes, and we arranged to have a phone call later that day. During our conversation, he explained all the details. He mentioned that he lived alone in the house and was renting out a room. The arrangement was that I could use all the rooms in the house except the master bedroom, which sounded perfect to me, so I agreed. A couple of weeks later, I packed everything into a U-Haul and drove to the house. During this time, Evan and I had been texting and calling each other, and he had sent me numerous pictures, but I hadn't had the opportunity to see the place in person until now. I arrived around noon and parked in the driveway. Although the house was small, it appeared charming from the outside. Evan was standing in the garage, waving me over. He gave me a quick tour and then helped me unload all my belongings into my room. Evan appeared to be an ordinary man in his mid-30s, nearly a decade older than me, but it didn't bother me much. He wasn't great at holding conversations and seemed a bit shy. Once we finished moving everything inside, I returned the U-Haul and took an Uber back to the house. By that time, it was almost 8 p.m., and I was quite exhausted. Evan was sitting on the couch watching TV, so I told him I would be heading to bed early and went to my room. Overall, it seemed like a nice place, and I was satisfied with it. I unpacked a bit more, set up my bed, and by 9 o'clock, I was finally ready to sleep. As I walked over to my door to lock it and turn off the lights, I noticed something odd. The doorknob was missing a lock on my side. Confused, I opened the door and saw that the lock was on the outside. Puzzled, I stepped into the living room and asked Evan why the bedroom door locked from the outside. He looked baffled and said he never noticed that he intended to rearrange it the following day. I merely shrugged and replied, "All right then," before retreating to my room. Fatigue had settled in, and I wasn't overly worried about it, though it was certainly a puzzling discovery. Once I climbed into bed, I quickly drifted off to sleep. In the dead of night, I was abruptly awakened by the sound of movement in the kitchen. Assuming it was simply Evan fetching a glass of water or something similar, I closed my eyes once more. Moments later, I detected footsteps approaching down the hallway, yet as they neared my room, they came to an unexpected halt. Opening my eyes, I glanced at the door and noticed Evan standing silently outside for what felt like 15 seconds. Then, I heard a distinct click, the sound of my door being locked. A chill swept over me as my stomach plummeted, and Evan continued onto his room. The instant I heard his bedroom door close, I rose quietly and approached my door. Attempting the handle, I realized it wouldn't move. I stood there, stunned, as the reality sank in. This man whom I had only recently met had locked me in. My initial fear gradually transformed into anger, and I called out to Evan, demanding that he unlock the door. It wasn't long before I heard him emerge from his room and approach my door. After a brief pause, I heard him place his hand on the door and, after a few moments, he unlocked it. I swung the door open immediately, confronting him with, "What the hell was that?" Ethan, visibly flustered, struggled to find his words, explaining that he merely wanted to ensure his own safety since he didn't know me well enough. While I could understand his concern, I made it clear that imprisoning someone in a room was far from a wise solution. I informed him that I intended to pack up and up quickly, his expression a mask of anger. I didn't want to escalate things further, so I jumped into the truck and slammed the door shut. My heart was racing as I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to start the engine. Evan stood there, glaring at me with a mix of frustration and something I couldn't quite place. I reversed out of the driveway, eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror, where Evan was still visible, standing rigidly on the lawn. The tension in my chest didn't ease until I was several blocks away, the house and its unsettling occupant far behind me. The morning sun was beginning to illuminate the streets, casting long shadows that seemed to mimic the unease I felt inside. Despite the awkward and unsettling encounter with Evan, I tried to focus on the road ahead. I had managed to pack most of my belongings, but the sense of urgency still lingered. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to put as much distance between us as possible. When I finally reached my new place, the sense of relief was palpable. The neighborhood was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy I had just left behind. I parked the U-Haul and exhaled deeply, savoring the fresh start that lay ahead. It was time to unpack and settle into this new chapter, leaving the oddities of the morning behind. Also to call it off. Something felt off about the situation, but I brushed it aside, convincing myself it was just nerves. When he finally arrived, the atmosphere was tense and awkward. Despite our month-long conversations, in person, he seemed different, less genuine and more evasive. As the evening wore on, that feeling of unease only grew stronger. We talked, trying to bridge the disconnect between our online interactions and this strange reality. I kept telling myself that perhaps it was just the newness of the situation that made everything feel so unsettling. When it came time to head to bed, a sense of dread settled over me. I couldn't pinpoint why, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. In a sudden decision, I feigned a headache and excused myself, saying I needed some fresh air. As soon as I stepped outside, I bolted into the woods behind the house, instinctively seeking distance and safety. I didn't look back, I just ran until I couldn't hear anything but the sound of my own heartbeat in the rustling leaves. When I finally stopped, I was breathless but filled with relief. I managed to pull myself together enough to return home, where I quickly locked the door and left. Gratefully, my brother offered me a place to stay until I could sort everything out. Although I never fully understood what transpired that night or what might have occurred, the experience left a lasting impression on me, lingering in my thoughts even years later. Reflecting on that time, I realized just how young and eager I was, longing for a connection and the thrill of new experiences. I was careful, always cautious and aware of potential risks, yet I still made a decision that seemed reckless in hindsight. Inviting him over felt like an opportunity, a chance for something special, but it turned into a lesson I would never forget. My parents were away, the house was mine, and everything seemed to align perfectly for his visit. Despite the 3-hour distance, he was more than willing to make the journey. Leaving right after he finished work at 11 a.m. Our conversations had seemed promising, yet the reality was a stark contrast, teaching me to trust my instincts no matter how irrational they might seem at the time. A sense of impending doom loomed over me, as if something was bound to go disastrously wrong. I nearly texted him several times to say I was no longer interested, but I hesitated since he was only 10 minutes away by then. I sprang up when I heard his car arrive, anticipating a warm smile when I opened the door. Instead, he barged past me, maintaining a blank stare while my 2 French bulldogs, who never reacted this way to anyone, began to snarl and growl at him. Everything felt instantly off. He swiftly followed me to my bedroom and wasted no time in forcefully undressing me. I reluctantly complied, as this was my first encounter with someone like him. He was nearly 6 years older than me, making me quite anxious. Fast forward a couple of hours, he suddenly asked if he could sleep in my room, which puzzled me since it was only 5 p.m., but I agreed and decided to continue watching movies alone downstairs. About an hour later, I heard what sounded like furniture being moved and the murmur of his voice, so I headed upstairs and opened my door, only to find him crouched in the center of my room, breathing heavily. I asked if he was okay, and he gestured for me to get on the bed. He sat me on his lap and covered my eyes with a blindfold, lightly placing his hands around my neck. I was already feeling incredibly uneasy, and my discomfort intensified as he tightened his grip. He asked, "Does anyone know I'm here?" "Do you?" "My friends know who I am and what I look like," I replied without hesitation, claiming that my sister and friends were aware of his presence. This was a complete fabrication, as I don't actually have a sister, and my friends were completely oblivious to the situation. Yet, something within me compelled me to say it. After several minutes of uncomfortable silence, he finally stood up to collect his belongings. I noticed that his backpack contained tape, rope, and handcuffs. Initially, this didn't bother me, as I knew he had an interest in such things, but in hindsight, I suspect it was intended for something far more sinister. Suddenly, he announced, "I think I'm going to head home. I have a long drive ahead, and I'm quite tired." I didn't hesitate to let him out of my apartment, as I was already feeling extremely uneasy. As he left, he neither glanced at me nor said goodbye. He sped off down the street as soon as he got into his car. I quickly returned to my room, wondering if he had left anything behind in his haste. On my desk, I discovered a note that read, "Being nice is what saved you." At the time, I had no idea what the note meant. Reflecting on it now, I am convinced he harbored very malevolent intentions towards me. I'm still angry with myself for allowing a stranger into my home, which was clearly a grave mistake. I immediately blocked him on all my social media accounts. I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate to have escaped unharmed. All I know is that he is now back somewhere in America. I'm unsure why he was residing in the UK when I met him, but all I can say is that I am relieved he is now many miles away from me, about 10 years. I lived alone, and my solitude was often unbroken. I felt deeply despondent after losing my girlfriend to a drunk driver. One evening, while savoring a beer and watching the sunset from my back porch, my heart skipped a beat when I noticed a large, unkempt man emerging from the line of trees. He staggered toward my house with a threatening demeanor. Living by myself, I frequently used my backyard for target practice, and at that moment, I was profoundly thankful for that habit. Instinctively, I rushed to secure all the doors while frantically dialing the police. What I was unaware of was that this intruder had broken in the day before through a basement window and had spent the night squatting there. He had left the basement door unlocked, and by this point, he had already made his way inside the house and was now ascending the stairs toward me. I clutched my rifle, aiming at the man as he approached down the hallway. I shouted at him, commanding him to halt and get on the ground, but he continued to advance toward me. I fired the first round, loaded with rock salt, but he showed no reaction. I quickly followed with a rubber bullet to the chest, yet the drugged-up man, clearly out of his mind, kept moving forward. This man was enormous, at least twice my size, and I realized that whatever substances were coursing through his system were going to numb any pain a rubber bullet could cause. He was backing me into a corner. Desperately, I pleaded with him to stop and warned him of what would happen, but he merely groaned at me like a zombie and shouted, "Shoot. Do it then." He lunged towards me, and I fired my third shot. I can't remember if it was buckshot or a slug, but it tore a gaping hole in his chest. It barely even slowed him down. He continued advancing, and in a frenzied struggle, he wrestled me to the ground. He was groaning and coughing up blood. Suddenly, he gripped my face with both of his massive hands and started squeezing my head. It was utterly horrifying. I could feel him trying to crush my skull like a balloon. I have no idea how long it actually lasted, but it felt like an eternity. Eventually, the injury took its toll on him, and he died on top of me. I lay there with him crushing me for several minutes, my energy completely sapped, and I could barely breathe with his weight pressing down on me. His body was forcing my rifle into my chest, causing me intense pain. When I finally managed to roll his body to the side, I was completely drenched in his blood, and the overwhelming smell is something I still vividly recall. I had entirely forgotten that I was still on the phone with the operator, who had heard our entire exchange, which more or less consisted of me pleading, "Stop, or I'll shoot," and the man menacingly taunting me. The police arrived shortly after, and the incident was reported in the local newspapers. There was a criminal investigation, but I was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing. It turned out that the intruder was wanted for the murder of an elderly couple in Baltimore and had somehow made his way 50 miles up the road into a rural area.